Chapter 41. Quick Kill Ding. The clash of steel rang out as Nathan's kunai met his opponent's blade. He still hadn't mastered the teleportation technique. At Genin rank 2, vanishing at will was beyond his skill, and the Iwagakure Shinobi reacted just in time, spinning up his kunai to block Nathan's strike. But the Genin's arm, wounded earlier, lacked strength. Nathan seized the advantage. With a flick of his wrist, he swept his kunai in a rapid series of slashes and thrusts, dozens of lightning-fast attacks that drove the shinobi backward. Though the Iwagakure ninja fought to parry and dodge, he couldn't match Nathan's relentless tempo. At last, Nathan spotted an opening. Channeling power through his hips, he coiled and delivered a brutal right kick to the opponent's midsection. Bang! A dull crash echoed as the shinobi's left arm went numb, and he was flung diagonally through the air. Nathan didn't pause to celebrate. Before his foot even touched the ground, he whipped out 3 shuriken and sent them spinning toward the fallen ninja, determined to finish the fight before his foe could recover. Nathan activated his level 3 ninja tool throwing and sent 3 razor-sharp shuriken arcing toward the Iwagakure Genin's vital points. The young shinobi twisted in midair to evade them, but with no foothold, he could only dodge 2. The third blade struck his thigh, severing an artery with a spray of blood. He crashed to the ground, struggling to stay upright as pain racked his body and a guttural groan escaped him. Before the Genin could recover, Nathan whispered the hand signs for body flicker technique and vanished, reappearing silently behind him. A wave of dread washed over the wounded ninja, sweat poured down his forehead, and his eyes widened in fear. "No, please," he rasped, voice cracking with desperation. Nathan's expression never wavered. He drew a tanto and drove the gleaming blade home. The sickening sound of steel slicing flesh echoed as the Genin's pupils dilated, a trickle of blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. Nathan's breath came out in a strangled chuckle. Ho! Ho! He tugged the kunai free from the Iwagakure shinobi's chest, as though it were no more than a scrap of cloth. In an instant, a fountain of blood burst from the wounded Genin's mouth, and he collapsed, utterly still. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan scanned the battlefield and sprinted toward Mizutani Shizuko. Shizuko's taijutsu was faltering under the twin assaults of her 2 opponents, and every second counted. When Nathan dropped into the fray at her side, the balance shifted instantly. Within 3 breathless minutes, both Iwagakure attackers lay dead at their feet. No time to rest. Together, Nathan and Shizuko vaulted into the clash, where Ryosuke was grappling with another pair of enemy Genin. They moved like a single, well-oiled machine. Shizuko struck from the left, Ryosuke from the right, and Nathan seized every opening in their enemy's guard. The 2 Iwagakure shinobi barely managed a feeble defense before succumbing, their bodies hitting the earth in quick succession. 4 down. Not a single friendly casualty. Nathan straightened and surveyed the ruined circle of combat. He and his 2 teammates, Shizuko and Ryosuke, were the only Genin sent from Konoha on this mission, so the Iwagakure forces had matched them shinobi for shinobi. Clearly, their opponents had believed numbers would secure an easy victory. Instead, Nathan's swift and decisive strikes had turned the tide before they even knew what hit them. As the dust settled, Nathan sheathed his blade and cast a glance at his allies. "Let's move," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We're not out of danger yet." Shizuko nodded, wiping blood from her lip. Ryosuke gave a sharp, determined nod in return. Together, the 3 Konoha Genin pressed on, ready for whatever lay ahead. Nathan faced what should have been a routine engagement, 2 Iwagakure Genin against a lone opponent. On paper, the Iwa Nin would have the upper hand, but they'd never met Nathan before. His true strength far outstripped his rank. In a single misstep, each of the 6 Iwagakure Genin attacking him fell one after another. Word of his unprecedented feat spread instantly. 3 Iwagakure Chunin abandoned their own battles and charged straight at him. Nathan didn't flinch. Without breaking stride, he called over his shoulder to Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, who shadowed him closely. "Keep the guy on the left busy for me." "On it," they answered in perfect unison. They'd trained together long enough to trust his call implicitly. With no further hesitation, Nathan planted his feet, launched himself forward, and hurtled toward the 2 Chunin on the right. At the same moment, shuriken whistled past him in tight, deadly arcs, aiming to pin him in place before he could reach his targets. Nathan's body drifted with uncanny grace, like a butterfly flitting among blossoms, and he slipped free of the assault without effort. The two Iwagakure Chunin, already solemn, grew even more wary. They hadn't doubted his ability to fend off shuriken after he'd taken down 6 Jonin in moments. What startled them was how close the blades came to him, so near they might have nicked his clothing. Yet Nathan never hesitated. Such daring precision is fraught with risk. A shinobi must balance courage with caution, maintain unwavering composure, and gauge the opponent's timing perfectly. Misjudge even slightly, and you bleed, or worse. Most ninjas leave a margin for error. Nathan did not. That single instant of flawless evasion told the two Chunin everything they needed to know. This was no ordinary adversary. Though it all played out in a heartbeat, their respect and their caution had grown immeasurably. Nathan darted between the two Iwagakure Chunin as they launched their shuriken, their blades whistling through the air. In an instant, he was upon them, and the clash of kunai rang out. A month of relentless training had sharpened his reflexes and battlefield instincts. This time facing enemy Chunin side by side, he felt no panic, only precision. But Nathan didn't intend merely to buy time. He swept the clearing with his eyes, taking in every detail. On the Jonin front, Konoha held the weaker position, but neither side had lost a single Jonin. Among the Chunin and Jinin, however, the carnage told a different story. Nathan himself had cut down 6 Iwagakure Ginin. His teammates had accounted for 3 more. Yet those 9 fallen foes had cost Konoha dearly. 2 of their own Chunin lay lifeless on the ground. When the smoke cleared, the enemy's remaining ranks stilled theirs. Iwagakure had 6 Jonin, 8 Chunin, and 1 Genin standing. Konoha, by contrast, fielded only 2 regular Jonin and 2 special Jonin, with 4 Chunin and 3 Genin left from the 17th squad. In raw numbers, 4 Chunin and 3 Genin versus 8 Chunin and a Genin, and just 4 Jonin against 6. The odds were stark, but Nathan braced himself. The battle was far from decided. Nathan tallied his kills, 8 plus 1. To keep the mid-rank shinobi battlefield from tipping out of balance, he still needed to take down 2 or 3 more lower-rank Iwagakure ninjas. The high-rank Jonin front, however, was out of his reach. He couldn't influence it at all. All he could do was hold this line and prevent it from collapsing. Beyond that, there was nothing he could do unless he chose to unleash his Sharingan. But Nathan would never reveal that secret unless he was backed into a corner. A trump card is only useful when it has the power to decide the game, and his Sharingan was exactly that. Even a single Magatama, when combined with the basic magic Jagang Jutsu, could stagger a well-trained Jonin if delivered without warning. And ninjas, no matter how skilled, were still human. Strike at the right moment, and you could either kill them outright or maim them badly enough to buy yourself a way out. So he kept his Sharingan hidden, ready to use only if everything else failed. Chapter 42, Timing. Nathan shook off his wandering thoughts and refocused on the 2 Iwagakure Chunin before him. The fight was far from over. Facing off against 2 opponents at once could have spelled disaster, but so far Nathan had held his own. That advantage wouldn't last forever, though. He was only 1 shinobi. Against a coordinated team, fatigue and small mistakes would inevitably creep in. He needed a decisive opening, fast. He couldn't afford to be locked in close-quarters combat any longer. His true strengths lay in his level 3 ninja tool throwing and his upgraded level 2 ninjutsu, skills wasted in tight melee. As he circled wide, plotting his next move, he caught sight of Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko struggling against the same 2 Iwagakure Chunin on the far side of the clearing. An idea struck him. From that moment on, Nathan occasionally glanced over his shoulder, his gaze heavy with concern whenever Ryosuke or Shizuko took a hit. He let small winces slip into his expression, tensing as if their pain rattled him. Each time, he made sure the enemy pair saw him do it. The 2 Iwagakure Chunin noticed. Their eyes followed Nathan's every look toward his allies, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces. Nathan allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. The real battle was just beginning, and now, thanks to perfect timing, he had them exactly where he wanted. Nathan and Shizuko circled each other, eyes locked, both waiting for an opening. At first, nothing happened, but in a split second, the Iwagakure Chunin's kunai nicked Shizuko's forearm. She gasped as blood welled from the shallow cut. In that instant, Nathan's concentration wavered. His guard slipped just enough that another kunai whipped through the air and sliced the fabric of his left shoulder. Dark red blood seeped through the tear in his jacket. A second Iwagakure Chunin grinned wickedly and lunged forward, dagger poised for a killing strike. Nathan hesitated, just half a heartbeat too long, and suddenly found himself on the back foot. Though his wound was superficial, that fraction of indecision shattered his rhythm. Forced to scramble backward under the enemy's relentless assault, he struggled to regain his balance and composure. The camp's dusty clearing echoed with the clash of steel and shouts of combatants, but for Nathan, time had slowed. Every step felt labored, every movement slightly out of sync. He knew he had to steady himself, and fast, before the Iwagakure operatives finished him off. The rock ninja who'd first struck Nathan saw his chance and pressed the assault. Nathan barely managed to raise his arm in time to block a savage kick aimed at his head. Had he not, the blow would have landed squarely on his skull. Instead, the impact drove him backward, his body whipping through the air as he tumbled away. At the very moment his feet left the ground, Nathan slammed one heel into the earth, giving himself just enough extra thrust to rocket farther and faster from his attackers. But the two Iwagakure shinobi paid him no mind. From their vantage point, Nathan was already out of immediate reach, exactly where they wanted him. As he flipped through the air, they loosed a volley of shuriken and kunai, their blades hissing through the air like lethal comets. Then, they sprinted forward in pursuit, determined to finish him off before he could recover. Nathan had seen this tactic before. After all, he'd used it himself not long ago to eliminate an Iwagakure genin. Now, on the receiving end, he tightened his grip on his kunai, flexing his knees to prepare for impact. He refused to let them puncture his defenses so easily. The wind whipped past his ears as he braced for the next move, calculating how best to turn this familiar trap to his advantage. Nathan knew that no matter how deftly he dodged this volley of shuriken and kunai, the moment he touched down, he'd be at the mercy of the two Iwagakure Chunin waiting below. If he didn't react instantly, they'd finish him off, just as they had that genin he'd already slain. And even a timely response wouldn't guarantee safety once they seized the initiative. The situation looked dire, yet Nathan's calm never wavered. If anything, a trace of satisfaction softened his features. With a simultaneous cry, the two Chunin unleashed their blades. Wham! 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 The metal projectiles struck Nathan in rapid succession, but instead of the sickening sound of steel piercing flesh, there was a dull, hollow thud, as though wood were being penetrated. Wood? Nathan's mind reeled at the realization. As he hit the ground, his entire body had taken on the rigid hardness of timber, shuriken and kunai lodged deep into his wooden form. Astonished, the Iwagakure Chunin froze, unaware that their most recent strike had missed its mark entirely. Nathan's unexpected maneuver halted the two Rock Village shinobi in their tracks. One of them gasped, "Substitution jutsu!" They weren't shocked that Nathan knew the technique, many talented ninja did, but that he'd mastered it so quickly. Even they might have struggled to pull it off so flawlessly the first time. Before they could press their advantage, both men scanned their surroundings, seeking where Nathan might have reappeared. Then, high above them on a sturdy pine branch, Nathan stood ready. He raised his right hand to his mouth and focused his chakra. "Fire release! Great fireball technique!" he shouted. Instantly, a massive crimson sphere burst forth, its scorching heat rippling through the air. The shinobi dove for cover, but one of them was too slow. The explosion slammed him into the dirt, knocking the wind out of him. He struggled to his knees, clutching the tree trunk as bruised and scorched flesh burned with every breath. Before he could steady himself, a kunai whistled through the haze of smoke and ash, aimed straight for him. Nathan watched intently as his kunai arced through the smoky battlefield toward the rock ninja. The heavy warrior twisted his body just in time, letting the blade whistle past. Relief flickered in the ninja's eyes, but Nathan had more than a simple kunai in store. With a faint zzz, the steel wire concealed behind the weapon snapped taut. Before the rock ninja could brace himself, the wire coiled around his arms and torso, yanking him against the rough bark of a nearby tree. He grunted in surprise, realizing too late that the trap wasn't the blade at all, but the invisible tether. "How?" he muttered, straining as he tried to break the bonds. Seals were impossible with his wrists pinned. Brute force was his only option, and the wire refused to give. Nathan held his stance, flames flickering at his fingertips. In an instant, a dragon of fire raced along the wire's length, scorching it until it glowed molten white. The blaze surged outward, engulfing the rock ninja's arms. A tortured scream ripped through the air, echoing across the battlefield until it, at last, faded to silence. Nathan lowered his arms, the smoke clearing to reveal his quarry trapped and incapacitated. Another victory well earned. Tap, tap, tap. Nathan emerged from the drifting smoke and dust, his Sharingan still ringing in his vision. Before him lay a rock ninja from Iwagakure, charred, beaten, but faintly alive. With cold efficiency, Nathan sent a kunai spinning through the air. It buried itself in the man's chest, extinguishing his final breath. His gaze shifted to the right, where the second Iwachunin staggered on one knee. Shuriken jutted from his side, blood pulsing from each wound as he struggled to stand. Nathan had set this trap moments ago. Using a glimpse of the Sharingan to anticipate every movement, he'd bound the ninja with steel wire, peppered his partner with shuriken, and now left the survivor to bleed out. Nathan sighed softly, as if disappointed. He drew another kunai from his sleeve and with a casual flick ended the man's agony. Both intruders lay dead. He paused, recalling the battle's turning point, that single, decisive kick. Once he'd resolved to strike swiftly, he'd even feigned worry for his teammates, baiting the enemy into underestimating Kesh, Immersive. Now, with the dust settling around the fallen ninjas, Nathan tightened his grip on his blade and prepared to press on. Nathan's youth and his quick rush to aid Ryosuke and Mizutani. Shizuko, right after defeating his first opponent, put the two Iwagakure Chunin completely at ease. So when Nathan feigned confusion over Shizuko's injury, they never doubted him. By deliberately exposing a few weaknesses, he baited them perfectly, and the moment their kick sent him sprawling, Nathan knew his plan was working. Though his foes followed up with a seamless barrage of strikes, Nathan's substitution technique, trained to flawless Grade 3 proficiency, activated instantly, swapping his form with a hastily summoned log. And as he drifted through the air, he deliberately increased his speed to buy just enough time to enact the decoy. From that instant on, he seized the initiative. First, exploiting their brief hesitation, he roared a fire style, great fireball technique that caught them completely off guard. Then, guided by his Sharingan, he flung kunai and shuriken with surgical precision, ensnaring one Chunin while severely wounding the other. Finally, he unleashed the finishing move he'd been setting up all along. Nathan didn't hesitate. He gathered his chakra and unleashed fire style, dragon fire technique, sending a colossal stream of flame barreling toward the two Iwagakure Chunin he'd cornered. Trapped and low on chakra, they had no hope of escape. As the firestorm died away, Nathan stepped forward with the same calm precision he'd shown the entire fight and delivered the finishing blow. Throughout the battle, he'd maintained complete control. Only when he sensed an opportunity did he switch from defense to offense, and even that calculated risk was well within his comfort zone. He was 90% sure he could pull off the substitution technique. Failing that, his Sharingan would give him just enough foresight to dodge any incoming strikes. In the end, the enemy never managed a single effective ninjutsu. Nathan seized the critical moment, neutralized both opponents, and concluded the skirmish without breaking a sweat. This encounter underscored one simple truth of shinobi warfare. Timing isn't just important, it can decide who lives and who dies. Chapter 43, Targeting. Nathan wiped the blood from his blade and crouched for a moment's rest. He'd just taken down two Iwagakure Chunin and was about to move in with Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko to finish off a third enemy. Suddenly, a sharp whoosh cut through the air at his flank. Instinctively, Nathan sprang back, just in time to see a kunai streak past his ear. He whipped his head toward the throw, and his heart sank. An Iwagakure Jonin, having broken free from the skirmish with Konoha's Jonin, was stalking straight toward him. Nathan's jaw clenched. Under his breath he cursed. Seriously? Now the Jonin's picking on the Genin? Before, it had seemed fair enough to focus on Genin while Chunin squared off against each other. No rank difference mattered once you were down, but a Jonin singling him out? That was cheating. He cast a hopeful glance at Furukawa for backup. Furukawa acknowledged him with a single raised eyebrow and a subtle stall gesture, then turned away to rejoin the main fight. Nathan forced a wry smile. Better to rely on himself than count on anyone else. He readied his stance. If this Jonin wanted a fight, Nathan would give him one. Nathan steadied his racing thoughts and methodically weighed his situation. First, his chakra reserves were still healthy. In the earlier skirmishes, he'd avoided heavy ninjutsu, so he'd only used a fraction of his energy, leaving him with roughly 1,500 chakra points. That was on par with a Chunin at full strength, more than enough to sustain him through another engagement. Second, his Sharingan remained concealed. If the moment turned dire, he could activate it to seize the advantage. Knowing he had that hidden trump card gave him a critical psychological edge. Most importantly, he concluded that his opponent could not be a true Jonin. If that had been the case, Guchuan wouldn't have tasked him with simply buying time. Nathan's regular display of skill, and even the sudden burst of power he'd just unleashed, wouldn't match up to a genuine Jonin's capabilities. Since Furukawa believed Nathan could stall this enemy, the only logical explanation was that the adversary was, at best, a special Jonin. With that clarity, Nathan braced himself. The next move would decide everything. Nathan's confidence surged as he weighed his options. Facing a battle-hardened Jonin, with countless missions under his belt and mastery of every technique, was far from ideal. But Nathan knew he could handle a specialty Jonin whose skill lay in a single remarkable technique. Still, the risk of revealing his Sharingan was too great. Better to withdraw, regroup, and strike again on more favorable ground. With that in mind, Nathan activated his instant body technique and vanished from sight, hurtling toward the trees at the battlefield's edge. Shiraishi Kangdo let out a low, vicious laugh, then vaulted into the air in hot pursuit. In moments, they were gone from the main fight, weaving through the underbrush in a deadly game of chase and evade. A few minutes later, deep in the forest, Nathan raced between gnarled trunks, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Without warning, a flurry of kunai whistled from behind. Nathan dropped into a roll, evading the knives as they flew past. One struck a nearby tree, lodging itself with a sickening crack. He skidded to a halt and froze. Closer inspection revealed a cluster of explosive talismans wrapped around the kunai's shaft, their edges flickering with blue fire. They were seconds from ignition, and if they detonated here, the blast would level the surrounding woods. Nathan's pulse spiked. He couldn't afford to be caught in that explosion. Drawing a steadying breath, he prepared to disarm the bomb-laced blade before it was too late. Nathan's pulse raced. This is bad, he thought, retreating just as the explosive talisman detonated. Boom! A wave of red flame roared outward, scorching the underbrush for several meters. The blast shook the surrounding trees, sending leaves raining down. When the smoke finally thinned, a pained cough broke the eerie still. Through the haze, a lone figure staggered to his feet, only to have a kunai fly out and embed itself in his shoulder. "Arr!" the man cried, blood staining his shirt. Perched high in the branches, Shiraishi Kangdo retracted his arm, face as calm as ever. He watched the wounded man slump to the ground with cool detachment. From the lingering smoke, a volley of shurikens whistled toward Kangdo's face. He sneered. Pathetic tricks. With a single fluid motion, he drew the short knife at his waist. The blade rang out as it met each spinning star, neatly severing them mid-air. Shurikens clattered harmlessly to the forest floor. At last, the smoke cleared completely. Nathan stepped forward from behind a battered oak, the ghostly after-image of his clone fading away. He squared his shoulders, determination shining in his eyes, ready for whatever came next. The illusion born of the clone technique was only effective in low light, useless in a head-on fight. Ignoring the ghostly double, Bai Shikang turned his cold gaze on Nathan and called out with amused curiosity, "Boy, are you going to step forward?" Nathan refused to answer. The faint smile on Bai Shikang's lips vanished. With a swift motion, he drew the short blade at his side and leveled it at his opponent. "Or are you ready to face death?" A chill palpable with deadly intent radiated from him. Any weak-willed challenger would have faltered under such a presence, but Nathan was no ordinary youth. He'd sworn to rise beyond this world. His ambitions stretched far wider than any single village or kingdom. He wouldn't be cowed by threats, and if he ever sought an ally, a force like Orochimaru would suit him far better. Observing Nathan's unshakable calm, Bai Shikang finally discarded his contempt. Here stood a worthy adversary. A sudden gust stirred the leaves overhead. One man balanced on a swaying branch, the other stood rooted beside the trunk. They were barely 10 paces apart, yet a silent wall of tension separated them. Neither spoke nor moved. Locked in a relentless stare, they seemed prepared to duel in silence until dawn broke. A single leaf drifted down, momentarily blurring Nathan's vision. Before he could register it, a sharp gust of wind sliced from his flank. Instinctively, he dropped into a squat as a gleaming short blade whistled just above his head. His opponent, Bai Shikang, regrouped instantly, spinning the blade in a reverse arc aimed at the right side of Nathan's neck. The edge hummed with menace, and Nathan felt a stinging scrape along his cheek. At the last possible instant, he thrust his arm upward, driving his kunai blade against Kangdo's. But Kangdo only smirked. Nathan's heart lurched as he realized his mistake. He'd let his guard down. A sizzling crackle split the air. Blue-white electricity leapt from Kangdo's palm into the metal of his own blade, and then sparked across to Nathan's kunai. Nathan's arm went suddenly dead, his kunai clattering to the stone floor. Seizing the moment, Kangdo unleashed a slashing blow. Nathan twisted away, but not fast enough. The short blade carved a shallow, burning cut across his chest. Nathan staggered backward, blood warm against his chest. As Kangdo advanced, blade raised for the finishing strike. Nathan groaned as a sharp wave of pain coursed through him, the acrid stench of burnt flesh and iron filling his senses. He didn't need to look down to know that Shiraishi Kangdo's short blade, infused with lightning chakra, had seared his chest. At least he wasn't bleeding out. The same chakra that cauterized the wound also halted any hemorrhaging. But in exchange, paralysis crept through his muscles, threatening to drag him to his knees. Discarding any pretense of stealth, Nathan summoned his Sharingan in a heartbeat. His dark irises flared blood red, the 3 tomoe inside each eye spinning like droplets of ink-black jade. He had no time for hand seals. He unleashed the Sharingan's hypnotic power at once. Their gazes locked. Nathan watched Kangdo's expression flicker from stunned disbelief to dazed confusion. He knew the genjutsu would shatter the moment he hesitated. With that thought, Nathan shoved off the scorched earth and sprang backward, putting precious distance between himself and his adversary. Meanwhile, Nathan flipped his wrists, drew several shuriken from his ninja tool pouch, and hurled them with deadly precision. Chapter 44. Full fire swish swish swish. Shuriken whistled through the air toward Jonin Shiraishi Kangdo, who snapped awake the moment they flew past. A close-quarters specialist, Kangdo's reflexes were razor-sharp. He twisted aside, raised his arm to intercept the blades, and deflected all but one. A single shuriken grazed his left forearm, leaving a shallow, stinging cut, but he hardly noticed the pain. His attention was fixed entirely on the attacker. Nathan stood a short distance away, his eyes glowing a deep, blood-red hue. Shock, greed, and fear flickered across Kangdo's face. Greed, because the Sharingan was the most prized commodity on both the black market and in their own village. One kill, one body, and a fortune would be his. Even the most disciplined shinobi could be tempted by that kind of reward. Pride, too. Eliminating an Uchiha genius promised a twisted, unparalleled sense of triumph. But fear ran deeper still. The reputation of the Uchiha clan was legendary. Their crimson eyes said to see through any deception and to turn the tide of battle. As Kangdo steadied himself, the memory of countless whispered warnings echoed in his mind. No amount of gold could erase the dread that coursed through him now. He narrowed his eyes at Nathan, weighing his options. The shadows around them seemed to pulse with tension. One false move, and this encounter could end in glory or in disaster. The desert wind carried the promise of violence. The next moment would decide everything. Nathan knew the saying well. If you're alone against one, you run. If you're 2 against 1, you strike from behind. He wasn't running. He was face to face with Shiraishi Kangdo, and instinctive dread fluttered in the Jonin's chest. Yet when Shiraishi took in Nathan's youthful features, that fear eased just a touch. His eyes drifted down to the jagged scar etched across Nathan's chest. The flesh had been seared shut by a lightning nature chakra strike, no longer bleeding, but still a grim reminder of the boy's resilience. That injury only bolstered Shiraishi's confidence. While Shiraishi studied Nathan, Nathan scrutinized Shiraishi in return. He had miscalculated. He'd never expected his opponent to wield a second chakra nature. Earlier, in his match against the Iwagakure Jonin, he'd stolen glances at the Jonin's battle, but had barely registered Shiraishi. Except for the moment the Jonin had vanished with an earth escape technique. Now Nathan realized how much he'd underestimated his adversary. Nathan had instinctively assumed his opponent's chakra nature was earth and never even considered the possibility of another elemental jutsu. He knew that once a shinobi reached Jonin rank, they often developed a second nature, but subconsciously he dismissed this special Jonin as merely an enhanced chunin. That lapse in judgment cost him dearly. Shiraishi Kangdo had concealed his lightning chakra to spring a surprise attack on the other team's Jonin, slaughtering several lower and mid-level shinobi in the process. The immediate carnage drew the enemy's ire, and Shiraishi was blamed for the deaths the real Jonin should have taken responsibility for. Nathan learned a harsh lesson. Until your skills reach a certain level, you cannot afford to waste chakra. One small mistake can be fatal. Now that the numbness in his body had mostly faded, he wasted no time. He raised his hands, weaving the seals for his next technique. Catching sight of the gesture, Shiraishi Kangdo quickly looked away. He knew all too well how dangerous the Sharingan could be, so he dared not meet Nathan's gaze while the seals were forming. One careless look, and he might be trapped in a genjutsu. Luckily for him, Nathan's illusion skills were still raw, and his Sharingan had not yet fully evolved. He couldn't conjure the kind of powerful genjutsu that Uchiha Itachi would later wield with a mere flick of the wrist. Had Nathan been able to, Shiraishi Kangdo's reckless stare moments ago would have been his undoing. "Fire release! Great fireball technique," Nathan intoned. No sooner had Shiraishi Kangdo's eyes shifted than a vast globe of flame hurtled toward him. With time too short to counter, he rolled clear of its path. But before he could regain his footing, another kunai zipped in from the front. He swung his sword up to block, only to glimpse the burning explosive talisman wrapped around the blade. Instinctively, he vaulted backward, clearing the blast radius just as the talisman detonated in a thunderous boom. The shockwave rattled the trees, but left Shiraishi Kangdo unscathed. Ignoring the ringing in his ears, he spun around, only to find Nathan already gone. In an instant, the young shinobi reappeared beside a gnarled oak, his movements blurred by the body flicker technique. With swift precision, he formed his next series of seals and unleashed his fiercest attack yet. Fire release, Phoenix Fire technique. Nathan's blood-red eyes glowed as the Magatama swirled in his pupils, his Sharingan insight pushed to its absolute edge. Suddenly, clusters of flame, like glowing phoenix seeds, erupted from his mouth. Each ember, guided by his chakra, shot straight toward the spots where Shiraishi Kangdo had planned to land, turning the forest floor into a roiling inferno of heat and ash. Yet Shiraishi's reputation as a special Jonin held true. The fiery onslaught tore at his cloak and blistered the surrounding trees, but he emerged with nothing more than a few scorched burn marks. Any ordinary Iwagakure Chunin would have been sliced to ribbons or burned beyond recognition. "Ahem," Shiraishi Kangdo said, swallowing past the heat in his lungs. He straightened, smoldering cloak hanging from his shoulders, and met Nathan's gaze. "Is that all you've got?" "Nah," Nathan replied with a cold chuckle. In a blink, he vanished into the treetops, then reappeared on a massive branch high overhead. His hands flew through a rapid series of seals, each movement precise and fluid. Fire-style, Phoenix Fire technique. Without warning, 1,000 brilliant fire motes burst from his mouth, streaking through the air like living missiles. Each one hurtled down toward Shiraishi Kangdo, determined to scorch its mark. Nathan felt reckless, barely noticing how much chakra he was burning. He only cared about landing a killing blow with his ninjutsu. One jutsu after another flew at Shiraishi Kangdo until the latter could no longer endure the onslaught and finally struck back. It wasn't that Kangdo lacked patience, far from it. But with each exchange, Nathan learned to predict his dodges, steadily turning the tide. Feeling the pressure mounting and afraid he'd lose his chance, Kangdo slipped behind a tree, gathered his chakra, and unleashed the flash body technique. In an instant, he lunged toward Nathan at blinding speed, hoping to catch him unprepared. What Kangdo hadn't counted on was meeting Nathan's Sharingan, already activated and finely tuned. Before Kangdo could reach him, Nathan had anticipated the maneuver. He too triggered the flash body technique, vanishing back out of arm's reach. Kangdo snarled in frustration and gave chase, but just then 3 kunai shot from the shadows, striking the trunks around him with pinpoint accuracy. The sudden volley forced him to a halt, disconcerted by the unexpected, precise ambush. Fire style, Phoenix fire technique. Nathan drove a kunai into the ground, halting Shiraishi Kangdo's advance, then unleashed his signature jutsu. As the familiar fireball blazed to life, Kangdo skidded to a stop and braced himself to dodge. But before he could move, a volley of scorching red shuriken erupted from the inferno, hurtling straight for his vital points. Taken completely off guard, Kangdo's eyes widened. He swung his sword in a frantic defense, managing to block the blazing shuriken, but there was no time to evade the searing flames that followed. With a thunderous roar, the fireball struck him full in the chest, hurling him backward. Cough! Cough! Kangdo collapsed to the ground, clutching his charred armor as violent spasms shook his body. He tried to rise again and again, but each attempt left him gasping for breath, unable to stand. Whoosh! Nathan materialized in the clearing and, without hesitation, hurled a kunai at the struggling Shiraishi Kangdo. The blade sliced through the air, covering 7 or 8 meters in an instant, and was mere inches from its target when Kangdo suddenly looked up with a sinister grin. In the next heartbeat, he vanished in a flash of lightning, reappearing behind Nathan at blinding speed. His earlier weakness had clearly been an act, yet Nathan showed no surprise. Anticipating the ambush, he'd already stepped back, and even as he retreated, his fingers flew through a rapid series of seals. Spirit binding spell, jail hang technique, he intoned. A web of crackling energy sprang into existence between them, ready to ensnare Shiraishi Kangdo before he could strike. Shiraishi Kangdo's breath caught as a colossal Sharingan swelled to fill his entire vision. This isn't ninjutsu, he murmured, realizing too late that what he faced was a genjutsu unlike any he had ever seen. In the next instant, an invisible force yanked at his will, yanking him into a waking nightmare. Though he remained aware of his body, he could no longer move a muscle. He forced himself to look down and recoiled. Rusted iron nails drove through his arms, chest, and abdomen. He knew, on some level, that it was only an illusion, yet the phantom pain drilled into his bones like a hot poker. His lips twitched in agony as every nerve screamed. Outside the hallucination, Nathan watched the crackling lightning along the short blade pressed to his throat sputter and die. Relief flooded him. He'd broken Kangdo's countermove. He straightened, even managed a small breath of victory. Then, from the shadows behind him, a figure exploded into motion, closing the distance with a speed to rival Kangdo's own sprint. The assassin aimed for his neck, intent on a single, lethal strike. But had Nathan truly let his guard down? Nathan's senses prickled the instant the figure appeared. In a flash, he vanished behind Baishi Kangdo, his pulse racing. Narrowing his eyes at the newcomer barreling toward them, he hissed, "So you finally show yourself." Withdrawing another step, Nathan watched as Baishi Kangdo's shadow clone, unwittingly bearing Nathan's ruse, flickered in surprise. The clone's lips parted, about to step forward and shatter the illusion, that when a tiny blaze erupted on its back. A burning, detonating talisman, boom, a deafening blast. Bright crimson flames licked Kangdo and his shadow twin, illuminating the darkened clearing just long enough to reveal their instantaneous disintegration. Only then did Nathan's shoulders drop, and the breath he'd been holding whoosh out of his lungs. On the surface, the battle had been a clear victory. Yet Nathan knew it hinged entirely on the power of his Sharingan. Without its hypnotic gaze to stall Kangdo, the relentless onslaught that followed Nathan's first misstep would have ended him. It was plain now, Kangdo had aimed for a swift, brutal finish, but Nathan's trap had worked better than he dared hope. Nathan's premature activation of the Sharingan was the only reason he'd escaped. Under ordinary circumstances, Simply breaking away from his pursuer might have been enough to survive. But the Sharingan granted him more than just its hypnotic trick. It sharpened his perception to a razor's edge. Through its insight, Nathan anticipated every subtle shift in Shiraishi Kangdo's posture. He poured every last drop of chakra into his three-door fire ninjutsu and pushed his ninja tool throwing technique to its absolute limit. Had he not, even a rank 2 fire jutsu and a level 3 tool skill would have been useless against this opponent. A single failed attack would have let Shiraishi stall him, draining his chakra reserves until death was the only option left. Fortunately, the fearsome strength of the Sharingan compelled Shiraishi to strike first. Yet his counterattack was anything but haphazard. It was meticulously planned. As he slipped out from behind the massive oak, he'd already cast the shadow clone technique, leaving a perfect decoy in his place. In an instant, the real Shiraishi circled around to assail Nathan from an unexpected angle. Caught off guard by the duplicate, Nathan barely had time to spin on his heel. Crimson Tomoe swirled in his eyes as he braced himself for the onslaught, knowing full well that one misstep now would cost him his life. Nathan deliberately took the lead, striking first to draw all of Shiraishi Kangdo's focus and open a window for his shadow clone. But Shiraishi's response, combining the fire-style, Phoenix Fire technique with a hail of thrown ninja tools, caught Nathan off guard and turned the tide beyond what Shiraishi had intended. Yet the attack was already in motion, the arrow was drawn, and Shiraishi had no choice but to let it fly. Immediately after unleashing the Phoenix Fire technique, Shiraishi Kangdo pretended to be mortally wounded, hoping to bait Nathan into overextending himself. Nathan saw through the ruse, but he pressed forward anyway. Now both fighters were locked in their own gamble. Shiraishi planned to strike Nathan from front and rear with his shadow clone and finish him off, while Nathan intended to exploit the feint and end the battle in a single decisive blow. It wasn't that Nathan fancied himself a genius. He'd simply braced for some trick ever since Shiraishi first unleashed the shadow clone technique. Nathan knew that, while the Sharingan couldn't directly map someone's chakra meridians or pressure points, it could still gauge overall chakra levels. That meant that, even though he hadn't actually seen Shiraishi Kangdo mold any hand seals for the shadow clone technique, he'd immediately detected the sudden halving of his opponent's chakra reserves. If he couldn't infer what was happening from that alone, he might as well have been blind. Mentally braced, Nathan wasn't fazed by Shiraishi Kangdo's surprise assault or the instant appearance of a shadow clone. The rumors circulating throughout the Shinobi world were true. In a one-on-one fight, the Sharingan offers an overwhelming edge. From the very start, he'd suspected that Shiraishi Kangdo had one final trick up his sleeve. It would have been downright strange if he'd been caught off guard. He drew a steadying breath, feeling the tight pain in his chest ease for the first time since the clash began. Pushing aside any lingering doubts, Nathan opened his status panel and reviewed his stats. The recent battle had gouged a significant chunk from his chakra reserves, not solely from performing ninjutsu, but also from the strain of maintaining the Sharingan. Prepared for whatever came next, Nathan flexed his fingers, ready to press his advantage. It normally takes only a trickle of chakra per minute to keep the Sharingan active, but in the heat of battle, that cost skyrockets. Nathan had just been testing the limit of his stamina, hundreds of chakra spent in mere minutes. The one upside was that his Sharingan evolution score jumped by 10 points. In theory, he discovered a shortcut to push his eyes further, but he wasn't willing to gamble his life again. With the proficiency panel at his disposal, he could raise his Sharingan safely, without courting near-death experiences. He watched the campfire's embers die out before him, pressing a hand to his still-bleeding chest. Gritting his teeth, he bent to pick up a short blade from the scorched ground. Then he turned away. He'd done more than enough for today. Whether he lived or died from here on was everyone else's concern. In any case, his body wouldn't let him rejoin the fray. His chakra reserves were nearly drained, and his wound made every breath a struggle. Nathan slipped off into the shadows, determined to find a hiding place and wait out this strange raid in silence. Under these circumstances, if Nathan insisted on joining the fight, it would be nothing short of suicide. He had no intention of sacrificing himself for anyone else. Chapter 46. Return time slipped away in the darkness. Nathan had spent hours crouched among the underbrush, every muscle tensed against the possibility of a second pursuer. But as the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the treetops, he still saw no sign of another enemy. Despite the exhaustion that weighed on his limbs, relief washed over him at the thought that his side might have gained the upper hand, and that Shiraishi Karato was still alive. If his allies had indeed repelled the attackers, they wouldn't have had time to hunt him down. With that in mind, Nathan determined it was far safer to wait for rescue than to strike out on his own, especially since a lone return could easily be nothing more than a deadly trap. So he settled in, prepared for a wait that dragged on for 2 more hours. Then, finally, the forest began to brighten. Leaves and pine needles gleamed with dew in the new light, and birdsong rose overhead. Nathan pressed himself flat against a mossy trunk, eyes scanning every shadow. Less than a minute later, he heard the soft crackle of footsteps. 4 figures emerged along a winding trail, a jonin leading 3 genin, all wearing the Konoha insignia. The jonin raised a hand, then froze, sensing something amiss. With a swift motion, he hurled a kunai into the air and called out, "Hold! Identify yourselves!" Hearing the challenge, the 3 genin broke formation, flanking their jonin in a loose semicircle. They tensed, ready to spring into action. Nathan watched the kunai arc toward him and met it with calm precision. He caught it effortlessly by the blade's spine. With a single fluid step, he moved out from behind the tree. "I'm no enemy," he said, voice steady. "Nathan, allied shinobi, I've been waiting for you." The jonin's eyes narrowed as he lowered his hand, signaling his genin to stand down, but his gaze was still wary. Nathan slowly dropped the kunai, pressing it into the moss at his feet, then offered his free hand in greeting. Behind him, the forest was peaceful again, except for the measured breathing of 4 shinobi, ready at a moment's notice to spring into battle, and one man whose relief at rescue was finally met with uncertain curiosity. Nathan stood before the makeshift checkpoint in his tattered Konoha uniform, the sleeves of his tunic rolled up to reveal the jagged scars across his chest. The younger genin on guard blinked in surprise. "A Konoha ninja?" Nathan nodded once, voice steady. The leading jonin tightened his grip on the hilt of his sheathed blade, but did not lower his guard. "Who are you, precisely? And what are you doing here?" Drawing in a breath, Nathan recounted everything. His mission, the ambush the night before, the desperate struggle to stay alive, and the abrupt teleportation that had thrown him miles from the battlefield. The jonin's steely gaze never wavered, though he exchanged a quick, assessing look with the other guards. Finally, he gestured for Nathan to follow him. At the temporary outpost, a cluster of hastily pitched tents lit by lanterns, the jonin examined Nathan's scars more closely by the flickering light. Silence stretched between them until another jonin arrived, breathless. "Lord Furukawa is here," he announced. Moments later, Furukawa stepped forward, crisp and authoritative. He ran his trained eye over Nathan's face, then checked his identification papers against a small roster. At last, he nodded. "You're who you say you are. Bring him back to the main base." Within the hour, Nathan found himself alongside Furukawa's retinue, trudging through uneven terrain under a sky still bruised by the dawn. By the time they reached the command center's stone ramparts, he was beginning to piece together the true scope of the assault. Inside the mess hall, a hushed briefing was already underway. Charts and maps lay spread across the long table. Furukawa tapped a finger on one map after another and explained, "Last night's raid wasn't limited to your sector alone. Iwagakure launched coordinated strikes on 3 adjacent defense zones and 2 on the PM, opposite flank of our main camp. Their objective wasn't to capture ground, but to draw our forces apart, thin our defenses, and sow confusion." Nathan stared at the web of arrows and markers. What had seemed like an inexplicable, scattershot attack now revealed itself as a calculated feint. A chill ran through him as the full weight of Iwa's strategy settled in his mind. The campaign had only just begun, and the real battle lay ahead. It wasn't only the Iwa shinobi conducting the raid, Sand Village operatives were involved too. Whatever pact the 2 villages had struck, they'd coordinated a simultaneous assault on Konoha's base camp. The strikes on the outlying defenses had been nothing more than diversions. Their true force lay in wait for the perfect moment. Late last night, after all perimeter outposts had sent out distress signals, the base camp dispatched several reinforcement squads. But barely had those teams departed when the main contingents of Iwa and Suna Shinobi, far more formidable than the scattered raiding parties Nathan and his companions had fought earlier, swept down from the east and west. In minutes, both flanks collapsed under their onslaught. The enemy pressed forward so swiftly that they stood on the verge of overrunning the camp itself. With the camp's inner defenses about to be breached, Orochimaru had no choice but to recall the support units and consolidate their position around the heart of the encampment. While Nathan and the remaining defenders scrambled to hold their ground at the perimeter, the main camp was engulfed in one of the fiercest battles anyone could remember. When the dust finally settled, Konoha had held firm. If they hadn't, Nathan wouldn't be standing here now, looking at Furukawa's missing limb. Furukawa's right arm, his dominant arm, was gone, severed during last night's onslaught. Nathan closed his eyes at the thought of that brutal struggle, then reopened them, meeting Furukawa's gaze with a heavy heart. Losing his strong hand would severely hamper his fighting ability, yet under the circumstances, it was the best outcome they could have hoped for. Of the 4 jonin dispatched to defend the camp, only Furukawa and 1 special jonin returned alive. Their squad leader, Hiro Nakajima, and the other special jonin paid the ultimate price in battle. A single chunin also fell, while the rest, among them Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, survived despite grave injuries. They owed their lives to Okura Seiya, the jonin stationed at the satellite outpost, who rushed in to reinforce the camp when the main support teams couldn't reach them in time. Without his timely arrival, their losses would have been even greater. Nathan stepped closer and laid a reassuring hand on Furukawa's remaining shoulder. "You held the line. We all did." Furukawa forced a wry smile. "The fight's not over. We still have to drive them back for good." Nathan nodded, drawing strength from his friend's determination. The cost of victory had been steep, but as long as they stood together, hope remained. Furukawa had been convinced that Nathan was dead. When rumors of Nathan's survival first reached him, he assumed someone was impersonating the missing shinobi. After all, Nathan hadn't been seen on the battlefield for weeks, and everyone knew that when he slipped away, he'd been chased by a seasoned special jonin. It would have been perfectly natural for him to have fallen in that pursuit. No one expected him not only to survive, but to turn the tables and kill his hunter. Furukawa was ecstatic. The reports praised Nathan's cunning. He'd baited Shiraishi Kurado into underestimating him, then struck with such sudden, overwhelming force that even the veteran jonin never had a chance to show his true power. Since no one had ever witnessed Shiraishi Kurato's full strength, talk swirled about whether the stories were exaggerated. But as long as Shiraishi himself refused to acknowledge his defeat, who would dare defend him? And in any case, Nathan's reputation would only grow from here on out. When Nathan finally staggered back into camp, he headed straight for the medical tent to find Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko. The moment they saw him, both of them broke down in tears of relief and joy. Seeing them safe and seeing their faith in him vindicated brought the first genuine smile to Nathan's face in weeks. Nathan and his 2 companions had scarcely exchanged a few words when he slipped away to the medical tent for treatment. His cuts and bruises could wait, but the chest wound, seared by lightning's scorching heat, demanded immediate attention. Though the intense heat had cauterized the flesh and staunched the bleeding, without proper care it would surely leave lasting damage. Nathan was determined to avoid ending up like Moonlight Gale, who now wheezed after every few steps. Thinking of Gale brought the Dance of the 3 Moons to mind. Last night's battle had revealed that Nathan's ninjutsu was more than sufficient for long-range strikes. All he needed now was to continue leveling up. In close-quarters combat, however, his basic physical training fell short. He knew he needed to learn more advanced techniques, but the Dance of the 3 Moons was beyond his reach for the moment. That secret art began by using the shadow clone technique to summon 2 phantom duplicates. Then, with the real ninja and his 2 clones moving in perfect synchronization, they would converge on the enemy and deliver a three-pronged assault, from above, from the left, and from the right. For now, Nathan resolved to strengthen his core skills before attempting such a complex jutsu. Nathan watched the demonstration and realized that the technique devoured an enormous amount of chakra. Its single blow, one-hit kill focus made it perfect only for assassins like Moonlight Gale, experts in stealth and surprise attacks. But Nathan didn't intend to become a killer in the shadows. His ambition was to stand tall as a hexagonal warrior. He needed something more versatile. So he set his sights on the Konoha-style sword technique, the very form that laid the foundation for that lethal strike. Few shinobi in the village mastered it, but legends like the 10,000-year-old Genin Maruboshi Kosuke and Jonin Bayun Yeshan had each developed their own advanced variations. Nathan reasoned that by first learning the original Konoha form and raising his proficiency, he could eventually forge his own signature moves. Even better, the hidden leaf didn't guard this technique as zealously as some forbidden arts. Any ninja with sufficient merits could trade for the scroll, and the requirements weren't prohibitively high. Its relative ease of acquisition, coupled with its potential for innovation, made the Konoha-style sword technique the perfect stepping stone on Nathan's path to becoming a true hexagonal warrior. As Nathan strode forward, he quietly tallied the battlefield merits he'd accumulated over the past month, just shy of the total he needed. Once he'd treated his wounds, he intended to visit the logistics office and redeem his points for that new combat technique. Chapter 47, Gains. 3 days later, just before dawn, Nathan stepped out of his tent and threaded his way through the waking camp. He watched soldiers and support staff stream past him and inexplicably felt a tightening in his chest, as though a storm were gathering on the horizon. Nathan knew exactly why. Orochimaru, proud and ruthless, would never endure 2 stinging defeats without striking back. First came the ambush in the canyon, then, 3 days ago, the daring night raid. Suffering back-to-back losses was humiliation Orochimaru could not ignore. Yet, as Nathan's gaze swept over the blackened stakes and smoldering tents, he realized that any immediate counterattack was impossible. In the last assault by the Sand and Rock Ninja, though Konoha's forces had eventually repelled them, more than half the camp's supplies had been reduced to ash. Orochimaru simply didn't have the provisions or equipment for another major offensive until fresh stores arrived. Judging by the pace at which Konoha's supply caravans reached the rain country a month earlier, it would take at least 20 more days for reinforcements to trickle in here. That window of time might be all the breathing room Nathan and his comrades needed, if they could hold the line. That estimate didn't even include the time needed to gather provisions. One hiccup in transporting supplies could add days, or even weeks, to the schedule. Nathan figured the whole operation would take at least a month. In practical terms, that meant large-scale battles were unlikely over the next 30 days, a thought that brought him genuine relief. He left the base camp and slipped past the outer defenses until he stood at the edge of a dense woodland on the northwest perimeter. Approaching the tree line, he heard the steady thud of strikes against wooden posts and the sharp ring of steel on steel. Nathan wasn't surprised. This grove had been set aside by command as a shinobi training ground. Even in wartime, ninja operatives couldn't remain on missions indefinitely. Every 10 to 15 days, they were granted a short respite, and many used that downtime not for rest, but for relentless practice. To keep the trainees organized and under supervision, the base had carved out this secluded glade for their drills and sparring sessions. More than a month had passed since Nathan arrived on the battlefield, and whenever he found a spare moment, especially over the past 3 days, he'd come back here to train. Today, he slipped into a quiet corner and drew the short sword he'd taken from Bai Shi Kang Do. The blade measured barely half a meter, its surface gleaming silver white. It was crafted from a tough iron alloy laced with chakra-conducting metals, giving it both remarkable durability and superb energy transmission. In the right hands, Nathan knew it could become a devastating weapon if he'd only mastered his fire-style ninjutsu. So far, his understanding of fire chakra remained too shallow to complete the blade's elemental transformation. He couldn't ignite the fire blade technique which would have seared an enemy with scorching flames as easily as it cleaved through armor. He shook off the frustration. There'd be time enough to refine his elemental control later. Now he focused on the fundamentals. Steeling himself, Nathan assumed his stance and began to drill the Konoha swordsmanship forms. Each slash, each parry, executed with growing confidence. Nathan had just swapped in the Konoha-style swordsmanship, and, much to his relief, the transition was flawlessly smooth. No unexpected glitches or side effects cropped up. Almost immediately, he set about practicing the new technique, only to discover a hidden bonus from his existing basic physical skills training. Several foundational moves overlapped with this advanced sword style. In under 3 days, Nathan not only learned all the core forms of Konoha-style swordplay, but even advanced it to level 1, at 60 out of 200 mastery points. By the book, this technique was rated a difficulty C. It shouldn't require exorbitant chakra, but under normal circumstances, anyone would need at least 3 days of steady practice to internalize its fundamentals. Nathan's rapid progression made sense once he realized how much of the new sword style was already covered by his perfected physical skills. Essentially, his groundwork had pre-installed large portions of Konoha-style training. Of course, this synergy couldn't carry him forever. Nathan knew the bonus effect had limits. It wouldn't indefinitely accelerate his development. Still, he couldn't help feeling a surge of confidence. With his basic physical skills complementing this new swordsmanship, he was poised to push his abilities further than ever before. Nathan had known all along that basic physical skills could only carry him so far. Once their reserves were spent, they'd be useless. Sure enough, 2 days later, he discovered just how true that was. That morning, he wrapped up another round of Konoha-style swordsmanship practice and felt only a marginal gain in proficiency. At the same time, his skill panel flashed, and the basic physical skills entry vanished entirely. For a moment, Nathan's heart skipped a beat, until he checked his memories and confirmed every fundamental technique was still ingrained in his mind. He breathed a sigh of relief. The system had absorbed his basic skills into his Konoha-style swordsmanship, permanently reinforcing the style itself. His progress read level 1, 181-200. With a promotion so close, Nathan wasted no time. After a brief rest to recover his strength, he dove back into training. Without the extra boost from the basic skills buff, each session demanded more focus, and moved more slowly. It wasn't until the afternoon that he finally broke through to level 2, 1500, in Konoha-style swordsmanship. Nathan wasn't a master swordsman, far from it, but he'd grown surprisingly adept with the short blade in his hand. After a few experimental cuts and parries, he set the dagger aside and replayed the last few days of his Konoha-style swordsmanship training in his mind. One fact stood out. His rapid progress owed everything to the flawless, basic physical skills foundation he'd already established. As he traced each movement, Nathan couldn't help but recall how the same principle had helped him master his fire techniques. When he first attempted the fire style, Phoenix Fire technique, it was only because he'd already brought the fire style, Great Fireball technique to proficiency that he'd been able to advance so quickly. Later, when he learned the fire style, Dragon Fire technique, it was again his command of both the Great Fireball and the Phoenix Fire that let him absorb the new technique more easily. Over time, he discovered a simple truth. Ninjutsu of the same elemental nature reinforce one another, accelerating his progress whenever he added a new skill to his repertoire. Nathan stared at his skill menu, a flicker of regret crossing his features. He'd upgraded all 3 fire-style ninjutsu to rank C at the same time, hoping they would feed off each other's progress. Instead, the benefit was negligible. With each jutsu at the same proficiency level, there was no overlap in learning. His progress stalled. He realized his mistake too late. To truly master multiple techniques, he should have focused on one first, pushing it to the next rank and learning its more advanced chakra applications. Only then would studying related jutsu feel like reviewing simpler material, accelerating his proficiency. It was like a senior tackling a junior's exam questions. With solid mastery of the basics, the rest comes much faster. By concentrating on a single technique, he'd not only multiply his learning speed, but also conserve chakra. Nathan kicked himself for not seeing it sooner. Thankfully, it wasn't too late to correct course. He opened the panel once more and scrolled through his fire style techniques. Among the three, Phoenix Fire Style stood out, not only for its destructive power, but also for the subtle chakra control it demanded. This would be the one to press forward with first. With a decisive nod, Nathan selected Phoenix Fire Style and prepared to channel every ounce of his focus into raising it beyond rank C. Nathan's choice was simple. It was the most practical option. The other skills weren't closely related, so he decided to work on them one at a time, improving them step by step. Chapter 48, Rotation Time, moves quickly. In the blink of an eye, a week has gone by. After days of rest, Nathan's chest wound has fully healed, and both Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko are back to fighting form. He's just received new orders. Beginning tomorrow, Team 17 will resume its normal missions. That means today is his last day of unstructured training. Nathan settles beneath the cool shade of a great tree, closes his eyes, and savors the renewed flow of chakra coursing through his body, readying himself for whatever tomorrow will bring. He nodded with satisfaction and murmured, "Status." In the next instant, the familiar pale blue panel flickered into view. Name, Nathan Uchiha. Age, Constitution 7, Spirit 9. Chakra, 35, Feftav 26, 527. Bloodline, Sharingan, Single Magatama, 112,000 to 165,000. Skills, Chakra Refining Technique, level 3, 664,000, 762, 1,000. Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique. Level 2, 11,500, 21,500. Fire Style, Phoenix Fire Technique. Level 2, 7,500, 101,500. Fire Style, Dragon Fire Technique. Level 2, 2,500, 10,500. Genjutsu, Jail Hanging Technique. Level 1, 105,200, 110,200. Twin Body Technique. Level 2, 234,500 to 375,500. Shadow Clone Technique. Level 0, 5,100s. Konoha Style Sword Technique. Level 2, 1,500, 315, 500. Reflection of Heart Technique. Level 4, 62,000, 186, 2,000. Ninja Tool Throwing. Level 3, 210,000, 507,000. Chakra Control of 3, 131,000, 151,000. 3 Body Technique. Level 3, 00. He studied the numbers for a moment. In just 1 week, his mastery of the Konoha-style sword technique had soared from 100 to 5,500, a dramatic improvement by any measure. Nathan flexed his fingers around the hilt of his sword, a quiet confidence settling over him. More than 10 days had passed since 2 Iwagakure Chunin had ambushed and killed him, at least in the original timeline. In this new reality, he could already suppress both easily with his blade, and if he leveled up his Konoha-style swordsmanship to rank 3, he knew he could even eliminate them outright. But history doesn't repeat itself, and in any case, those 2 rogues were long since dead. Shaking his head at the folly of regrets, Nathan shifted his focus to another skill, ninja tool throwing. In just over 10 days, his proficiency had skyrocketed by 360 points at rank 3, an astonishing leap. The reason was simple. If not entirely above board, Nathan had been secretly using his Sharingan to sharpen his perception and speed. He hated the idea of exposing that power too soon, but he refused to let his own reservations choke his progress. As long as the risk remained manageable, he would exploit every advantage. This surge in throwing ability had granted him fresh insights into trajectory angles and timing. Though he hadn't yet crossed into a true breakthrough, each incremental gain made him deadlier and more precise. Strength, after all, is built one nail at a time. Satisfied with his improvements, Nathan withdrew his gaze and examined the crimson arc staining the training wall, a stark blood column that marked the final resting place of his latest target. He wiped sweat and a few drops of blood from his forehead, then sheathed his kunai and straightened his back. Tomorrow, he would press on, refining each technique, planning each move. The past was unchangeable, but the future belonged to the prepared. And Nathan intended to be more than ready. 2 months have passed since Nathan first opened his eyes, and he's only amassed 160 proficiency points. No matter how patient he tries to be, a growing impatience gnaws at him. Over the past 12 days of recovery, he's poured nearly 2/3 of his chakra into the reflection of the heart technique, yet the Sharingan's evolution hardly registers any acceleration. At this pace, he figures it will take another 10 months to reach the 2 Magatama stage. That's 4 months faster than the initial estimate of 16 months, but still far too long for his liking. Fortunately, his chakra refinement technique is on the verge of leveling up. Currently sitting at level 3 with 762 out of 1,000 proficiency points, Nathan believes that if his next mission isn't too taxing, he can carve out 8 hours of practice each day. In about a month, he'll hit level 4, and with that upgrade will come a larger daily chakra reserve. More chakra means more time for reflection of the heart, and at last he can give his Sharingan's evolution the push it needs. Nathan studied his status panel one last time. His heart reflection technique was still only level 4, and every 5 proficiency points would advance his Sharingan by 1 tomoe. Hitting level 5 promised a noticeably stronger effect, nearly halfway to the next Sharingan form, and would speed up his progress even more. He ran the numbers in his head. From 1 tomoe to 2, it would take at most 4 or 5 months. That was still a stretch, but far better than the year and 10 months he'd feared. With that thought, he exhaled, relief easing the tension in his chest. Shutting down the display, he immediately refocused on his training. A distant clatter of bell-tinkling carts and the thud of wagon wheels broke his concentration. They were in the Rain Country's northeast plains, escorting a convoy of a dozen supply trucks. Around him, 100 fully armored Konoha shinobi pressed forward along the rutted service road, weapons at the ready. Nathan marched with them. Though his expression was anything but calm, there was no hiding his impatience. Nathan had been hoping for a relatively low-risk assignment, something that would let him level his chakra refining technique to rank 4 and speed up the evolution of his Sharingan. Instead, the village headquarters ordered his squad to relieve another unit on the front lines at Base Delta. This was no ordinary posting. Frontline duty meant constant danger, enemy scouts and infiltrators, ambushes in the wilderness, and no guarantees of backup when things went south. Stranded so far from home, Nathan knew they'd have to rely entirely on their own strength if a mission went off the rails. A simple firefight might mean life or death. A true catastrophe could wipe them out completely. For a fleeting moment, Nathan seriously considered slipping away, but reality set in quickly. His power level was nowhere near sufficient for a lone wolf existence. Better to remain under the protection of the strongest ninja in the village than to strike out on his own before he'd earned at least Kaja-level prowess. The shinobi world was far more treacherous than civilians ever imagined. Once you were cut off, there was no rescue, no mercy. Steeling himself, Nathan swallowed his reluctance. In this line of work, caution wasn't cowardice, it was survival. Nathan prayed silently that the base he was assigned to wasn't of great importance. If it proved insignificant, simply surviving the month-long rotation would be easy enough. And if he ever found himself facing threats beyond his limits, he'd turn and run without a second thought. Nathan wasn't about to give his life for Konoha. The next 3 days passed uneventfully. No ambushes, no bleeding-edge missions, just a steady march toward their destination. When they finally arrived, Nathan found a small town reduced to rubble. Collapsed walls and shattered roofs littered every street. The road beneath their feet was uneven, scarred by faint, dusty traces of Earth-style ninjutsu. Apart from the Konoha shinobi waiting at the entrance, the town was utterly deserted. Most residents had fled at the very start of the war. Those who remained lay lifeless in the ruins of their homes. As Nathan stepped forward, the stench of decay grew stronger, drifting from the mangled corpses stuffed into broken houses. It was a grim reminder that when powerful forces collide, ordinary people pay the price. These were no honored war dead, just innocent victims caught in a ninja battle, not of their own making. Could you please provide the full text of the chapter you'd like me to rewrite? That way I can ensure I capture every plot point and character detail in a natural, shed English version. Chapter 49. An unexpected surprise. 2 kilometers southwest of town, deep in the forest, Nathan squared off against Guchuan. In Nathan's hand was a gleaming kunai. Guchuan wielded a short sword. Each time their blades met, a crisp ring cut through the stillness as they exchanged fierce blows. This was the 11th day of their rotation mission, and until now they'd seen little real danger. Any skirmishes with enemy shinobi had been minor, too small to test their skills. Nathan had noticed that the Iwagakure operatives farther north were unnaturally cautious, almost cowardly. Those scouts never pressed an attack. The moment they were spotted, they'd fall back without hesitation. Nathan suspected the reason was Kyoha's looming threat of retaliation. After 2 major incidents, Konoha's forces were surely preparing a counterstrike. The hidden village's frontline units, then, had been charged not with pursuing explorers like him, but with guarding against a surprise assault from the south. As a result, their patrols had been rigid, careful, and all too easy to slip past until now. Chapter X: Breaking the Bottleneck. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. What was the point of risking everything in a fight to the death when he could use that energy to train? Under Master Guchuan's relentless sparring, his practice of Konoha-style swordsmanship had skyrocketed. He was on the cusp of a breakthrough from level 2 to level 3. After 10 intense minutes, Guchuan finally sheathed his kunai and took a respectful step back. He studied Nathan for a moment before speaking. "That's enough for today." Nathan bowed deeply. "Thank you for your guidance, Master." Guchuan inclined his head. "Your technique is nearly maxed out at this stage. If you want to shatter your current limit, you'll need to put in more focused, disciplined training." Nathan brought up his status panel, already accustomed to the translucent holo display hovering before him. Konoha-style swordsmanship, level 2, 497 or 500. Just 3 more proficiency points and he'd ascend to level 3. A bottleneck, Guchuan called it, an invisible wall meant to slow progress. Nathan closed the panel and felt a fierce excitement surge through him. A bottleneck? He murmured to himself, "I'll demolish it." He turned to Master Guchuan, determination blazing in his eyes. "Tomorrow, we begin again." Guchuan only nodded, and in that silent agreement, Nathan knew his path was clear. The next breakthrough was closer than ever. Nathan kept his expression calm, replying, "Yes, Sensei, I understand." Without another word, he resumed his training. On the sidelines, Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, who had planned to take a break, paused mid-rest when they saw Nathan digging in with such fervor. They abandoned their downtime and jumped back to their drills. Watching the 3 of them, Instructor Furukawa allowed himself a small, knowing smile. Both Ryosuke and Shizuko possessed talent far above that of the average student, though neither approached true genius. Yet, by striving to match Nathan's diligence, they were improving at a rate rivaling even the prodigies. In barely 4 months since graduation, their abilities had already climbed to Chunin level, a testament to the influence of a driven peer. Nearly an hour later, as dusk's pale light filtered through the training hall's open windows, Nathan paused mid-strike. He sheathed his sword with a soft click and closed his eyes, letting the day's efforts settle in his limbs. A quiet warmth spread through him. His mastery of Konoha-style swordsmanship had finally deepened. Where he had stood at level 2 with 497 out of 500 proficiency points, he now ascended to level 3, beginning anew at 1,000. Nathan exhaled slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. This small milestone renewed his resolve. With renewed focus, he stepped back onto the training floor, ready for whatever challenge came next. A warm current rose from deep within Nathan's bones, rushing through his veins and meridians and revitalizing every cell in his body. He recognized the sensation immediately. It was the same surge he'd felt when his basic physical skills had leveled up from 1 to 2, triggering a boost in his physical attributes. Now it was happening again, a clear sign that his strength was about to increase once more. A few moments later, the warmth subsided. Nathan summoned his status panel and confirmed what he already suspected. His physical attribute score had climbed from 7 to 8. A wave of relief washed over him, as if invisible shackles had just snapped free. Nathan knew that if he now practiced the chakra refining technique, his chakra limit would expand in step with this newfound power. This breakthrough, tearing through his previous physical ceiling, had unlocked fresh potential. He'd expected to wait for his Sharingan to evolve again before experiencing such gains. Instead, the Konoha-style swordsmanship had delivered an unexpected, delightful surprise. Nathan paused to consider the nature of Konoha-style swordsmanship. After all, its advanced techniques have always included an element of physical conditioning. If basic physical training can trigger bodily evolution, there's no reason higher-level swordsmanship shouldn't do the same. Of course, the real engine behind his transformation was the solid foundation he'd built through years of relentless practice. Whether it's basic physical training or Konoha-style swordsmanship, these disciplines act only as primers. If he wanted to climb ever higher, the only way was to train harder still. Moreover, with this recent breakthrough in sword technique, Nathan expected his Sharingan to evolve more rapidly. But until he ran some real tests, he couldn't be sure how much faster it would develop. Lost in thought, Nathan didn't notice Guchuan slipping into the clearing until the tall shinobi's voice cut through the quiet. "All right, everyone, time's almost up. Let's head back." Nathan and the others gathered their gear and followed Guchuan as he led the way down the winding path toward town. Night had fallen by the time Nathan returned to his room. He settled onto the tatami mat, sat cross-legged, and closed his eyes. Slowly, he began to refine his chakra, letting it flow smoothly through every nerve and muscle. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity before Nathan finally opened his eyes. In the dim glow of his chakra lamps, he reached out and tapped the flat panel built into the wooden wall, a thin, translucent screen that displayed his current stats. His fingertips traced the readouts, studying the numbers and gauges that tracked his progress. Now that he'd unlocked this new level of Konoha-style swordsmanship, it was time to see just how far his power had grown. Nathan's body pulsed with renewed energy as he absorbed the aftermath of his latest breakthrough. With each physical attribute point he added, his latent potential expanded, and so did the volume of chakra he could store. Over the past hours, he'd watched the gauge of his chakra ceiling climb steadily higher. Yet as encouraging as that was, it still wouldn't be enough to hasten his Sharingan's evolution. No matter how quickly he awakened to new levels of power, his Sharingan would remain stagnant unless he could draw more chakra each day. He reminded himself of the crucial limit. Until his physical attribute rose from 7 to 8, he could never exceed a daily chakra threshold of 3,500. With impatient determination, Nathan settled into his meditative stance, closing his eyes and centering his mind. He visualized every cell in his body awakening to a higher state, bones strengthening, muscles rippling, nerves sharpening, until he could feel his very potential stretching to a new maximum. 3 days later, Nathan emerged from meditation to put his breakthrough to the test. He ran through a battery of chakra control drills, watching the numbers climb on his internal gauge, first to 3,800, then 4,000, and finally 1,200. He allowed himself a small, triumphant grin. His physical attribute had indeed advanced to level 8, and with it, his Ili chakra limit had broken past the old 3,500-point ceiling. But the gains didn't stop there. In mastering this new tier of power, Nathan had sharpened his technical finesse as well. His proficiency with the reflection of the heart technique jumped by 4 points, granting him unprecedented subtlety in sensing and reflecting off other chakra signatures. With a broader chakra reserve and enhanced skill, Nathan felt the gears of destiny turning, and his Sharingan at last would be ready to evolve. Nathan understood the mechanics at a glance. Every 5 proficiency points he earned would advance his Sharingan's evolution by 1 stage. In practical terms, that meant his Sharingan would accrue 4 proficiency points every 5 days, a dramatic uptick in progress. And this direct gain was only the beginning. As Nathan's physical conditioning improved, he would be able to sustain the chakra refining technique for longer sessions each day. Under those circumstances, mastering level 4 of that technique would come far more quickly. Reaching level 4 would, in turn, boost the total amount of chakra he could channel daily, and that extra chakra would accelerate his Sharingan's evolution even further. Each breakthrough would feed the next, creating a cycle of 1 step faster, every step faster. If Nathan poured maximum effort into every stage of his training, he could fully exploit this system and push his Sharingan's development to its absolute limits. Chapter 50. Commands. Ah! A startled scream rang out across the low hills. Expressionless, Nathan slid his dagger free from the chest of the fallen Iwa shinobi before him, the final motion crisp and efficient. He straightened, scanning the field. Dozens of Konoha ninja were finishing off scattered enemies with the same practiced precision. Around them lay the bodies of warriors from both sides, strewn across the blood-soaked earth. Today marked the 20th day since Nathan had achieved his physical breakthrough, and it was supposed to be the last day of their garrison duty. Yet the Iwa forces, still encamped more than 20 kilometers to the north, had launched an unexpected assault at first light. Thanks to their home field advantage, the defenders of Konoha managed to repel the attack, though not without cost. Several shinobi lay wounded, and lives had been lost on both sides. Why the Iwa chose this moment to strike was a question Nathan didn't care to ponder. They would return to the village tomorrow, regardless of the enemy's motives. Whatever plans the opposition had set in motion, they no longer concerned him. After sheathing his dagger, Nathan joined his comrades in gathering the fallen for burial rites. Once the field was cleared, the group made their way back to the fortress gate, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. No sooner had they passed through the heavy wooden doors than a breathless messenger approached Nathan. "Captain Furukawa," the young soldier panted, "you're needed in the council chamber. Immediately." Nathan offered a curt nod, steeled himself, and followed without hesitation, ready to receive whatever new orders awaited him. Nathan's heart sank as he watched the camp stir with unusual tension. He'd known something was wrong. Sure enough, less than half an hour later, Lieutenant Furukawa returned with grim news. Tonight, actually in just 3 hours, they were to break into 4 assault teams and launch a surprise strike on the Iwakure stronghold, more than 20 kilometers from their position. The order had come straight from headquarters, no refusals allowed. It wasn't only their outpost. Almost every Konoha stronghold facing the Rain Country front line had received the exact same command. In effect, this was a full-scale offensive. Is this Orochimaru's revenge? Nathan thought bitterly. It felt childish to him, just a reckless bid for vengeance. What hope of advantage did Konoha have here? Their forces weren't superior in the Rain Kingdom. All this promised was mutual slaughter. Anger flared in Nathan's chest. He'd been counting on a swift return home within a day. Now everything had shifted in an instant. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that his keep had been singled out. If the orders weren't meant for every stronghold facing Yanyan village, why else would his fort be named? Then again, there wasn't a single critical objective tied to this mission, just another routine patrol. Might as well stay sharp and react when the moment came. With that in mind, Nathan activated his proficiency panel. A pale azure glow unfolded before Nathan's eyes, coalescing into the familiar status window. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 11, Constitution, 7-8, Spirit, 9, Chakra, 3,450, 5,027, 6,100, Bloodline, Sharingan, Single Magatama 160, 1,000, 271, 1,000, Chakra Refinement Technique, Level 3, 762, 1,000, 986, 1,000, Fire Escape, Fireball Technique, Level 2, 3,500, Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, Level 3, 12, 1,000, up from Level 2, 101, 500, Fire Escape, Dragonfire Technique, Level 2, 13,500, Magic Shackle Technique, Level 2, 5,500, up from Level 1, 110, 200, Instantaneous Body Technique, Level 3, 225, 1,000, up from Level 2, 375, 500, Shadow Clone Technique, Level 0, 5,100, Konoha Style Swordsmanship, Level 3, 400, 1,000, up from 1,000, Art of Reflecting the Heart, Level 4, 706, 2,000, up from 186, 2,000, Ninja Tool Throwing 4, 3,500, up from Level 3, 507, 1,000, Chakra Control Level 3, 180, 1,000, 3 Body Technique, UL 43, 0. When Nathan first arrived at the frontline fortress, he'd worried there'd be no time for training. To his surprise, the Iwagakure shinobi here were unusually calm. No constant skirmishes, no hasty missions. This unexpected tranquility gave him a rare opportunity, a stable environment in which to push himself. Over the past month, every technique he'd focused on had surged forward in mastery, each stat jump marking another step closer to his goal. Nathan stared at the readout in front of him. The top-line statistic was chakra. 20 days ago, his body had experienced an unforeseen breakthrough, an explosive surge that shattered its previous limits. Almost overnight, the cap on his chakra pool began to climb. In less than 2 weeks, it had jumped from 527 points to 6,100. After that, though, progress ground to a halt. A one-time surge in physical attributes could only carry him so far. By contrast, his mastery of the chakra refining technique was advancing at a steadier clip. Just over a month of focused training had brought him to level 3, 986 points toward the 1,000-point threshold. If he survived tonight's mission and made it back to base camp, he'd hit level 4 in less than 48 hours. From that point on, everything would accelerate. Not only would he fine-tune his other skills more rapidly, but the evolution of his Sharingan would also kick into overdrive. Speaking of which, his swordsmanship had seen remarkable improvement over the past 20 days. Nathan's proficiency in Konoha-style swordsmanship was nearly halfway to level 3, a rank that, according to Furukawa, placed him on par with many seasoned jonin. If he could maintain this momentum, soon he'd be wielding his blade as deftly as any elite shinobi. Now all that remained was to survive the night ahead. Even relying solely on his taijutsu, Furukawa would still be a match for Nathan, maybe even come out on top, though Nathan might eventually wear him down if the fight ran long enough. Of course, Furukawa wasn't missing an arm anymore. Orochimaru had grafted on a replacement, no doubt stolen from some unfortunate shinobi, that functioned perfectly for sealing jutsu. That was the moment Nathan realized Furukawa had fully joined Orochimaru's ranks. Every time he thought about it, a spark of anger kindled in Nathan's chest. He knew how fiercely Orochimaru coveted the Sharingan, and that, once the doctor-turned-traitor set his sights on it, Nathan would become a marked man. Defecting would mean Konoha would almost certainly move to eliminate him. But worrying over it now served no purpose. Thanks to the enhancements granted by his proficiency panel, Nathan was confident he'd be ready to face Orochimaru when the time came. If he couldn't, then he'd have no one to blame but himself. As for Konoha's threat of liquidation, Nathan had already shown Sarutobi Hiruzen his loyalty by refusing to rebel. If the village leadership still dared to come after him, they must really think he was soft. He wasn't. Shaking off the thought, Nathan turned back to his training, focusing on the ninja tool throwing technique. Nathan's Sharingan has paid off. His ninja tool throwing skill has just climbed past level 3 and into level 4, now sitting at 2000 proficiency. With the Sharingan's predictive edge, he can launch kunai and shuriken almost instinctively. Thrown weapons still rarely score outright kills unless the target is vastly weaker, but they excel as support tools. Level 4 isn't the ceiling for his throwing ability, but each new proficiency point is now much harder to earn. Over the past month, several of Nathan's other skills have also surged forward. His fire style, Phoenix Flame technique, has unexpectedly broken through from level 2 to level 3, 12,000, granting both faster casting and finer control. At the same time, he's sharpened his binding spell and refined his body flicker technique to new heights. Armed with these improvements, Nathan feels ready if he ever crosses paths with Shiraishi Kangdo again. Even without opening his Sharingan, he's confident he could keep Shiraishi pinned down indefinitely. To recreate the bait and counterattack strategy he used before, though, he'll still need those telling glimpses into an opponent's next move. Nathan decided to concentrate first on upgrading his fire style, Phoenix Flame technique, before returning to the Fireball and Dragon Flame jutsu. In theory, tackling all three at once would speed up his overall progress, but his chakra reserves were still too limited. Once Phoenix Flame reached level 4 or even level 5, he could revisit Great Fireball and Dragon Flame with far greater efficiency. Besides, after mastering the Konoha-style sword technique, Nathan found he relied less and less on ninjutsu. For the moment, Phoenix Flame alone was more than enough firepower. He also had two vital support skills, magic, shackle technique, and instant body technique, to round out his arsenal. Under Nathan's careful cultivation, both support skills had just leveled up. Magic shackle technique was now level 2, its casting speed noticeably faster and its binding effect far stronger. Instant Body Technique had advanced to level 3. When activated, it boosted Nathan's movement speed by roughly 20%. Whether he needed to slip away or close distance in an instant, the upgraded skill made all the difference. Because Nathan's abilities had grown so much, he had almost no defense when the Hidden Rock Village base was ambushed. Had he not developed those skills, he wouldn't have survived, and he certainly wouldn't care as deeply now. In the end, strength is the foundation of everything. Without it, the smallest ripple can drown you. With it, you can stand calm even in the face of a tsunami. Chapter 51. The operation begins. And the unexpected night had fallen, and a fine drizzle blurred the edges of the world. Under the cloak of darkness, Nathan and his team trailed behind Guchuan as he led them toward a small village roughly 100 meters to the west. This was the Rock Ninja's stronghold, a cluster of low-roofed huts punctuated by sparse, wavering lanterns. They crept up a gentle slope, water beating on their cloaks. At the crest, Guchuan raised his fist, a silent command to halt. Without a sound, the others froze in flawless synchrony. The past month of skirmishes and relentless training had sharpened their instincts. They were no ragtag band, but a disciplined force that needed no spoken orders. Guchuan consulted his watch by the dim lantern glow. 10 minutes remained before the attack. He lowered his hand and stared into the night, signaling the group to brace themselves. Each operative stilled, steadying their breathing, attuned to every heartbeat. Around them, only the soft patter of rain disturbed the darkness, an eerie calm before the storm. Nathan lifted his hand and drew in a breath, tasting the sudden surge of rain on his fingertips. The sky had grown ominously dark, and with it the downpour intensified. Clearly, this wasn't the weather to be relying on fire techniques. He frowned at the thought, but a reassuring grip on the short blade at his waist eased his mind. His level 3 Konoha-style swordsmanship, 430 points out of 1,000, was more than enough to steady him. A thunderous boom cracked through the air to the south of the village. Nathan whipped his head around and caught sight of a red flare erupting over the rooftops. An explosive talisman had gone off. Seconds later, the harsh clang of steel on steel echoed in the distance. A fight was already underway. Had someone been discovered? He shook off the doubt. Their operation had been meticulously planned. 4 teams, 4 directions of attack, all converging on the village at once. Nathan's squad, under the command of Guchuan, would strike from the west. The other 3 teams were moving into position on the north, east, and south. Rain or no rain, there was no turning back now. Nathan tightened his grip on his sword, steeled himself for the coming clash, and signaled the others to advance. Judging by the way things were unfolding, it was clear the southern team must have been compromised. They wouldn't have struck prematurely if everything had gone according to plan. What Nathan suspected, Guchuan undoubtedly realized as well. After only a few seconds' thought, Guchuan barked the new order. "Plans have changed. Fall in behind me." With that, he bolted toward the Rock Ninja base. Nathan and the others wasted no time falling in behind him. It was obvious that Guchuan wasn't the only one itching to launch an early assault. No sooner had they closed in on the compound than a muffled explosion rolled in from the north. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. As long as it's not a one-on-one fight. His eyes scanned the darkness, every muscle taut with vigilance. Then he caught it, a faint crack beneath his boots. Glancing down, he felt the ground trembling, like a minor tremor of magnitude 1 or 2. It was hardly more than a whisper of a shake, yet that subtle vibration sent a chill through him. In that instant, Nathan knew something far more dangerous was about to go down. Nathan didn't hesitate. He yanked Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko aside in a single fluid motion, darting off the path as if propelled by instinct, and shouted back to his teammates, "Watch the ground!" Some of the team hesitated, puzzled by his warning, but others reacted instantly and leapt clear. No sooner had they landed than the earth split open. Cracks of every size raced across the road, just where Nathan and the others had been standing, accompanied by a violent tremor. Those few Konoha genin who had been slow to move were swallowed almost immediately by yawning fissures. Only then did Furukawa and the Jonin leading the squad realize something was terribly wrong. It wasn't that Nathan's senses outmatched theirs. It was that the attack had been aimed precisely at the lower-ranking shinobi, deliberately bypassing Furukawa's more alert veterans. Otherwise, with their combined experience and vigilance, they would have detected the underground movement long before it opened up beneath their feet. Before anyone could brace themselves, jagged rock spikes burst from the earth like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Several Konoha shinobi, caught flat-footed, ended up gashed by the protruding stone. Fortunately, none of those wounds proved fatal. With barely more than 20 members in their squad and already 4 or 5 lost to the first onslaught, they could ill afford any more casualties. If they'd been taken completely by surprise a second time, some of them surely would have died. It was Nathan's warning shout that saved them. His cry snapped everyone out of their stupor, giving them just enough time to react when the spikes rose again. Whoosh! 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 Guchuan and a handful of other veteran ninja flicked their wrists, sending kunai whistling toward the source of the attack. Moments later, the sharp clang of metal against stone echoed through the darkness, proof their blades had been deflected. At the same time, the barrage against Nathan and the lower-ranked shinobi came to an abrupt halt. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps sounded on the rocky ground. A seasoned ninja from Iwagakure emerged from the shadows, his silhouette framed by the flickering glow of distant lava flows. As the newcomer appeared, Furukawa wasted no time. He barked orders to a nearby senior shinobi to intercept the intruder, then led his men straight for the gates of Iwagakure. Before setting out, Nathan and the other scouts had been briefed on their objectives: inflict as many casualties as possible on enemy forces and destroy the village's supply reserves. From the way Furukawa spoke, it was clear he intended to focus on the latter. Nathan didn't relish the thought of a pitched battle to the death with the rock shinobi. If they could sabotage the stockpiles and slip away under cover of night, they'd call it a win. Of course, the rock shinobi weren't about to let that happen. No sooner had Nathan's team reached the outskirts than hundreds of kunai whistled down from the battlements, forcing them into an immediate retreat. During their daytime raids, the defenders had leaned on their home field advantage, walls, choke points, and prepared defenses to repulse attackers. Now, under the cover of darkness, those same defenders returned fire with brutal abandon. Their cavalier attitude toward ammunition, treating each kunai like a disposable missile, proved that on enemy turf, the rules of engagement could change in an instant. Nathan realized with a sinking heart that this mission would demand every ounce of skill and cunning they had. Without time-space ninjutsu or a sealing scroll to carry extra gear, a ninja's arsenal in the field is painfully limited. Against a foe of this caliber, any ordinary defense is not only insufficient, it's easily shattered. Beside Furukawa, a Konoha Jonin stepped forward without a sound. He lifted his arms and wove a series of hand seals in the blink of an eye. Instantly, chakra surged from his body, fusing with the pelting rain to form a colossal water dragon over 10 meters long. The serpentine behemoth roared, its maw tearing open the storm-dark sky before it lunged at the brittle stone wall behind which the rock ninjas lay hidden. One powerful strike would pulverize the barrier and bury the defenders in the wreckage, or worse. Anticipating the assault's devastation, a guttural roar erupted from the other side of the wall, warning the attackers that the rock ninjas would not go down without a fight. Don't even think about it. With a thunderous roar, a massive wall of earth burst from the ground. Nathan recognized the jutsu instantly. Earth style, earth flow wall, a B-rank ninjutsu prized for its impenetrable defense. In theory, a water technique could breach an earth barrier, but and cast by a jonin, even his potent water dragon bullet stood no chance. Nathan's attack smashed against the earthen bulwark in a dull, resonant crash, the dragon-shaped torrent splintering into harmless droplets. The tremor underfoot told him all he needed to know. The rock shinobi behind the wall was unharmed. Nathan cursed under his breath. Fortunately, his own jonin ally was already preparing a counterstrike. Chapter 52. Infiltration. Boom! 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 Blinding flashes lit up the battlefield as a string of explosions rocked the earth wall behind them. The cries of rock ninjas rang out in alarm. When Nathan looked to the front line, 2 of Konoha's jonin had vanished without a trace. In the chaos, they'd slipped beneath the fortress walls using earth escape ninjutsu, and were now the ones igniting the pandemonium inside. Moments later, the massive earth barrier the rock ninjas had raised shattered apart, unveiling the mayhem beyond. The two Jonin were already surrounded by a dozen hostile shinobi, desperately fending off relentless attacks. Captain Furukawa's voice cut through the din. Teams 1, 2, and 3, engage and pin them down. Team 4, you're on Supply Depot Recon. Move out. Nathan's heart sank. He belonged to Team 4, which meant he'd be scouting alone with 3 Chunin-level shinobi. He knew how this would look. Everyone assumed a Genin didn't belong in a Chunin squad. As he reached for his kunai, he could feel their disapproving glances. No matter. There was no time for second-guessing. If he wanted to prove himself, he'd have to lead the way. With steely resolve, Nathan followed the others toward the fortress's interior, every sense on high alert. But none of the 3 teammates protested when they learned how the teams were being arranged. The reason was simple. Over the past month fighting the rock ninja, Nathan had proved himself every bit the equal of a Chunin. They weren't worried he'd slow them down, so they raised no objections. After all, Guchuan, who never trifled with matters of life and death, had approved the lineup himself. Only Nathan suspected that Guchuan had a deeper motive. To his teammates, he looked like an ordinary Genin with Chunin-level skill, but Guchuan knew that Nathan's true strength far exceeded that rank. In reality, Nathan was meant to be the team's hidden ace, held in reserve until a critical moment. Nathan had no quarrel with this plan. In fact, he preferred infiltration and reconnaissance missions to frontal battles. There was little he liked more than slipping behind enemy lines, and this assignment promised both the challenge and the stealth he enjoyed, without the full-scale risk of an all-out fight. Nathan's strike team hadn't even launched their raid when word of their position was leaked, and before he could react, Stone Village Shinobi had the base completely surrounded. Every approach was blocked, and Nathan quickly realized that the Jonin-level guards must have been deployed early, keeping the foot soldiers inside as cannon fodder. Only mid- and lower-rank ninja remained within the perimeter, and frankly, they posed no real threat to him. But why did the Stone commanders send their elites to the front lines while leaving their own base lightly held? Nathan knew the answer. Ninja warfare isn't like an ordinary battle. Supplies can be restocked, but experienced shinobi take years to train. The hidden Stone Village would gladly sacrifice lesser troops to protect their Jonin, reserving those high-end fighters for a decisive counterattack. In Nathan's book, that meant this mission, at least from his vantage point, was hardly dangerous. Of course, that assessment didn't necessarily apply to the rest of his team. For the others, there was no room for error. Beneath the looming ramparts of Iwagakure's hidden base, Nathan and his 3 companions slipped through shadowed alleys toward the village's heart. Nearly 10 minutes had passed since they'd infiltrated the settlement, and at last, they'd pinpointed the rock shinobi's munitions vault. They owed their success to Chunin Yamanaka Ichiryu. Though not a direct scion of the famed Yamanaka clan, Ichiryu had mastered its clandestine mind-reading art. Moments earlier, the team had shaken off pursuing guards and breached the perimeter. Then they'd tracked down a lone rock shinobi of Chunin rank, struck swiftly in a silent ambush, and subdued him before he could sound the alarm. Standing over their captive, Ichiryu probed his thou, gots, and effortlessly extracted the vault's precise location. According to his intel, the supply warehouse lay hidden beneath the central plaza. All that remained was to destroy the stockpiled weapons and raw materials. Once the objective was complete, the team would vanish into the night and exfiltrate. Mission accomplished. They still had to deal with whatever defenses lay within the village. When they reached its center, Yamanaka Izuro halted the advance with a raised fist and motioned for everyone to stop. He formed a series of hand seals, closed his eyes, and appeared to survey their surroundings. Nathan didn't know the name of the jutsu Izuro was using, but he could feel a wave of spiritual energy pulsing outward, a hallmark of Yamanaka clan techniques. Suddenly, Izuro's eyes snapped open, and he fixed Nathan with an intense, searching gaze brimming with surprise. "What is it?" he demanded. Nathan remained perfectly calm. "Nothing." Izuro shook his head and dropped his scrutiny. "All right." Yet as Nathan watched him turn away, he couldn't shake the memory of that look. Had Izuro detected something in his eyes? The thought of Sharingan flickered through Nathan's mind, then he dismissed it. No, there was no other explanation. Without activating his Sharingan, even the most inexperienced Yamanaka, let alone the clan leader, wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Nathan pressed his palms to his temples and smiled to himself. There's only one explanation, he murmured, feeling the surge of chakra pulsing through him. Before setting out, he'd taken every precaution to maximize his reserves. He'd rationed his chakra carefully and even performed the chakra refinement technique to recover and refine his energy. As a result, his total chakra had soared past 4,500 units, far more than most Chunin, and he was only 11 years old, still before the rapid growth phase that most young shinobi experienced. In other words, his chakra pool would only expand from here. Because he hadn't revealed his Sharingan, such an extraordinary reserve would appear completely natural. Nathan himself knew better, but to anyone watching, his energy levels were just a remarkable anomaly. Nathan kept his chakra tightly regulated wherever he went, at the forward base or here in town, carefully limiting his interactions so as not to draw attention to anything unusual. Yet today, his secret was inadvertently exposed. He realized he'd stood too close to Yamanaka Ichiryo, who had just used a ninja technique to probe for anomalies. Ichiryo's jutsu, known as Spirit Touch, allows its user to sense the presence of living beings in a given area and estimate their strength by detecting the amount of chakra they possess. Ordinarily, the readings are only rough, and yet Nathan's chakra reserve is extraordinary. The moment Ichiryo activated Spirit Touch, he was startled by the intense chakra signature right beside him. At first, he suspected there must be a disguised Jonin hiding nearby. Only after narrowing his focus did he confirm it was Nathan himself, and that realization shook him even more. But with their mission underway, there simply wasn't time to dwell on the discovery. Chapter 53, Quick Decision. Nathan watched Ichiryo Yamazaka close his eyes and slip into his trademark sensory trance, his face a perfect mask of calm. Leaning in, Nathan murmured, "Just so we're clear, no talk about the Sharingan. If you sense anything similar, keep it to yourself." A strange chill ran down Nathan's spine, and he instinctively took a small step back. After a moment, Ichiryo's eyes snapped open. "They're split into two squads," he reported evenly. "One is posted around the two-story building up ahead. The other lies in ambush below ground. Both are standard Genin teams." Nathan exhaled. "So each team is one Chunin commanding 3 Genin?" "Exactly," Ichiryo confirmed. "A standard Genin team consists of 1 Chunin and 3 Genin. Above that, Chunin teams, like ours, are either a special Junin leading 3 Chunin or 4 Chunin together, typically assigned B-rank missions. Those operations often involve enemy shinobi but rarely escalate to Junin-level combat. Junin teams are even more complex, with their exact makeup shifting to match mission requirements." Nathan nodded, eyes narrowing as he pictured the enemy positions. With that intel in hand, it was time to act, and to do so without hesitation. In the Hidden Leaf, the number of Jonin assigned to a mission depends entirely on its difficulty. A typical mission will be led by 1 or 2 Jonin, supported by a handful of elite Chunin. Only in the most extreme cases, usually wartime, would you see the entire Jonin corps mobilized together. After all, each Jonin is the backbone of the village. Wasting them all on a single low-level task would be unthinkable. Outside of those emergencies, Jonin teams rarely pair up. Inside the enemy compound, only 2 Genin squads had reported in so far. Nathan and his 3 teammates exchanged confident glances. With stakes this low, they expected a quick, clean victory. Nodding in silent agreement, the 4 of them sprinted toward the building's entrance. Before they could reach the door, a flurry of kunai sliced through the air. "Cover me!" Nathan shouted. He darted forward, hands snapping to his waist. A sharp metallic click announced the drawing of his short blade. Then came the crack of steel on steel as he spun and parried, each assassin's knife bouncing off his sword's edge. In the blink of an eye, every kunai lay scattered at his feet. None had come close to his teammates. Yamazaka Ichiryo and the others trusted Nathan's skill completely. Before the enemy's kunai could find its mark, they burst from cover, and in the next instant, the clash of steel and grunts of battle rang out. Inside the small building, 4 Wagakure ninjas were scrambling to fend off the surprise assault of 3 Konoha Chunin. Nathan swept his gaze across the clearing. Satisfied that no one else was lurking nearby, he sprinted toward the lone stone village Chunin. The Iwakure shinobi's eyes widened as Nathan closed in. He's fast, he thought. Nathan paid no mind to the ninja's surprise. Drawing back his arm, he launched his kunai with blinding speed. The blade streaked through the air like lightning, leaving only a faint, cold shimmer in its wake. The stone village Chunin's expression flickered with alarm, and he reflexively raised his own kunai to block. Clang! The sharp clang of metal on metal echoed around them. The Iwagakure ninja's arm went numb at the impact, and his grip wavered. His hurried defense was no match for Nathan's precision and power. Nathan was still a child, his strength not yet fully matching an adult's, or else he would have shattered his opponent's kunai with a single blow. That, however, mattered little. After a brief stalemate, he twisted his wrist, transforming the downward chop into a rising, diagonal slash aimed at the Iwagakure Chunin's face. The shinobi recoiled, his balance faltering. Seizing the opening, the Konoha Chunin alongside Nathan flung his kunai straight for the enemy's midsection. Desperate to evade, the Iwakure ninja twisted, but his feet slipped, leaving him unable to dodge. The kunai ripped across his waist, carving a deep gash as blood poured from the wound. There was no room for mercy. Weakness meant death. With a cold gleam of steel, Nathan swung his blade again, determined to finish the wounded Chunin. Clang! 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 Steel rang out as Nathan's blade met the Iwakure Chunin's sword. At first, the opponent managed to match his speed and strength, but it wasn't long before Nathan's mastery of Konoha-ryu swordsmanship took over. This style, honed for blistering speed, pinpoint accuracy, and ruthless efficiency, had leveled up under Nathan's relentless training, and by the third tier he could wield any blade with devastating effect. What the Iwagakure ninja didn't realize was that a second Konoha Chunin had silently circled behind him, ready to strike. Forced to split his attention, the enemy faltered. 30 heartbeats later, Nathan spotted the opening. His short blade flashed forward in a single, fluid motion and pierced the man's chest. A sickening hiss of tearing flesh cut through the clamor. The Iwagakure Chunin staggered, eyes fixed on the blade protruding from his armor. His kunai slipped from limp fingers. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. His knees buckled, and he crumpled to the ground. Nathan withdrew his dagger smoothly and took a quick survey of the area, every sense alert for the next move. The mission had only just begun. Nathan surveyed the other 2 skirmish zones and saw 3 Iwagakure genin already teetering on the brink of defeat. Determined not to give them, or themselves, any chance of a setback, he sprang into action. In one swift motion, his kunai flashed out and found its mark in the nearest enemy's flank. Beside him, the Konoha Chunin who joined the assault seconds before dropped another with a precise throat strike. Outnumbered 4-3 and outclassed in skill, the Iwagakure warriors fought like cornered animals, lashes of desperation their only weapon. For a brief moment, their eyes flared with resolve, but momentum was against them. In less than 2 minutes, all 3 lay sprawled on the ground, their bodies whipped by the cold moonlight. Nathan glanced at his allies. With grim efficiency, they stripped the fallen of their remaining shuriken and kunai, binding wounds where needed, and resetting their own tools for the next stage of the mission. He wiped his blade clean, then turned to the silent figure of Yamanaka Izuro, who'd been their guide. "Where's the underground entrance?" Nathan asked. Izuro didn't hesitate. "This way." He led them across the lobby's cracked marble floor and down a narrow corridor lit by flickering lanterns. Every footstep echoed, every breath raised the stakes. But Nathan's jaw tightened in determination. Ahead lay the final passage, one that would take them deep beneath Iwagakure's stronghold and, he hoped, straight toward the answers they'd risk their lives to find. Yamanaka Izuro moved down the corridor, eyes flicking from one door number to the next. Finally, he stopped in front of room 107. "This is it," he said, stepping forward. "The entrance has to be here." He shoved the door open. A gust of air roared into the hall, then whizzing kunai shot out, thudding into the opposite door. At the same instant, a line of explosive tags hidden along the threshold ignited with a harsh, sizzling flare. Nathan, Izuro, and the other 2 ninjas sprang aside as sparks scattered. None of them flinched, An ambush had been exactly what they'd expected. Their last skirmish had been so swift that word of their advance had surely reached this rock ninja squad. A trap at the entrance was only natural. In a fluid motion, the four backed away from room 107. Izuro brushed his hand over a hidden panel beside two smaller doors. With a soft click, both side entrances slid open. Without hesitation, Nathan and the others slipped inside, closing the doors behind them as they prepared their next move. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions rocked the corridor in rapid succession. Crimson flames, carried on a devastating shockwave, roared out along both walls, engulfing everything in their path. Chapter 54. Mission accomplished and Bad News Creek. The heavy door swung open. Nathan and his four companions stepped out into the charred corridor and made their way to the twin doors of room 107. Yiliang, the rock ninja who'd guided them this far, raised a sharp gesture. Nathan gave a curt nod. The others followed suit. They drew their kunai, carefully bound each blade with a glowing detonating talisman, and waited for Yiliang's silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. They hurled their weapons into the room. "Be careful," came a frantic warning from inside, but it was too late. Boom, boom, boom. A trio of violent explosions rocked the corridor. Scarlet flames roared from the doorway, scorching Nathan's cheeks and sending waves of heat down the narrow hall. The walls on either side trembled under the blasts, the confined space magnifying every shockwave. Nathan squinted through the smoke. How was the lone rock ninja inside holding up? As the last embers of flame guttered out, he tightened his grip on the short blade at his side and charged into room 107, ready for whatever came next. Through the haze of smoke, several shurikens came hurtling at him. Unfazed, Nathan raised his short blade and swept it in a smooth arc. Each projectile rang off with a crisp ding-ding-ding as he deflected them one by one. At that moment, his three teammates burst into the room. 2 o'clock! Yamanaka Ichiryo called out, instantly locking onto the enemy's position. Without hesitation, the other two shinobi darted past Ichiryo, racing to the front right of the chamber. There, half buried in the soft earth, crouched an Iwagakure Chunin, preparing to launch a second wave of surprise attacks. Nathan's eyes narrowed. The Chunin must have slipped down through the entrance to the underground storage vault to escape the detonating talisman's blast. In such a confined space, anyone caught in that explosion at close range would be severely, if not fatally, wounded. He glanced at the fallen Iwagakure Jinin nearby. Though he'd evaded the blast's direct impact, the shockwave had still damaged his internal organs gravely. Now, as his teammates closed in, Nathan tightened his grip on the blade. There was no time to hesitate. This enemy, crouching below the surface, was about to pay for every moment of stealth he'd gained. How does he still have the strength for a counterattack? Nathan wondered, shaking his head in disbelief. He pushed the thought aside and refocused on the battle unfolding around him. By now, the Iwakure Chunin had clambered out of the underground warehouse's entrance and was locked in combat with two Konoha Chunin who had rushed to intercept him. At the same time, two Iwakure Genin burst from the tunnel behind, engaging Yamanaka Izuryo as soon as he arrived. Seizing the moment, Nathan slipped 6 shuriken between his fingers and took aim at the advancing rock ninjas. With a fluid motion, he launched all 6, some spinning at blistering speed, others arcing more slowly. 2 blades even collided midair, ricocheting off course toward unexpected targets. A moment later, low groans cut through the chaos. 4 of Nathan's shuriken had found purchase in the rock ninja's limbs. Though none struck vital organs, the wounds were enough. The 3 Iwa shinobi staggered, blood seeping from their wounds. Within breaths, punctuated by agonized cries, all 3 collapsed, their lives extinguished on the battlefield. Nathan paused only long enough to confirm that their foes lay unconscious on the cavern floor. Then he motioned his 3 teammates forward and slipped through the tunnel's entrance into the rock village's underground supply depot. Inside, a 200-square-meter chamber stretched before them, hewn from living rock by earth-release ninjutsu. Sturdy wooden racks filled every available inch, piled high with field rations, spare kunai and shuriken, stacks of wound salves, sealing scrolls, everything a ninja patrol might need for an extended operation. But it was the explosive tags that caught Nathan's eye. With a handful of those, they could buy precious seconds. He crouched by a load-bearing pillar and showed the others his plan. If we pepper every support and choke point with these tags, the blast will collapse this place and slow their pursuit, he explained. In rapid succession, they pressed talismans into the rock, behind crates of rations, along ceiling beams, even inside empty mortar barrels, covering the depot in a web of hidden charges. When the last tag snapped into place, Nathan led the way back to the tunnel's mouth. There, Shanzhonggiliang carefully arranged a timing seal on the stone lintel. With a practiced flourish, he traced the final rune. 3 minutes, he announced. That seal will trigger the entire chain reaction. After that, this whole warehouse goes up. Nathan met his gaze and nodded. Let's go, he said, voice low but steady. Without another word, the four of them darted down the mountainside, slipping into the night. Behind them, miles of solid rock awaited its fiery fate, and the only evidence of the warehouse's existence would be the rumble and flash that would soon light up the sky. Nathan stood atop the massive cache of explosives, heart-pounding. Even though he'd painstakingly wired every detonator himself, no one could feel truly safe standing on a powder keg like this. One mistake, and the blast would wipe them all out. Better to get clear as soon as the fuse ran out. Their sole objective now was simple: trigger the explosion and then race back to the town base as fast as they could. And really, who needed a formal signal for mission completion when your signal was literally a fireball? Tick, tick. Seconds crawled by until on the 3rd minute the bomb ripped the village apart. A towering pillar of red flame shot through cracked earth into the night sky, turning the whole area blood orange. The shockwave thundered outward, shaking the ground for 2 or 3 kilometers in every direction. On the fringes of the blast zone, Shinobi of Konohagakure, posted north, south, east, and west, spotted the inferno and instantly understood the sabotage was a success. They sprung into action, engaging nearby rock country ninja and then falling back in tight formation toward the town base. But the rock ninja would not retreat quietly. Enraged by the destruction of their homeland, they lashed out with renewed fury, refusing to yield an inch. What should have been an orderly withdrawal erupted into a savage chase, steel clashing against steel in a bid to slaughter every enemy in sight. The scorched earth beneath them trembled as both sides fought on, each driven by bloodlust and the certainty that only death would grant them peace. Late that night, Nathan and the others finally returned to the town base, exhausted, wounded, and shaken. Even Yamanaka Ichiryo's precognitive warnings hadn't been enough to keep them from walking into hidden ambushes. They'd been attacked repeatedly, and one of their teammates wasn't so lucky. As Nathan stepped inside, the sight that greeted him froze his blood. Out of the 40 or so people who'd set out, nearly half were gone. His chest tightened with dread as he made his way to the team's barracks. There, in the dim hallway, stood Mizutani Shizuko. Her eyes were red, her face pale. At that moment, Nathan's heart skipped a beat, a cold premonition settling over him. She opened her mouth, her voice catching on the first word. Nathan, Ryosuke, and Sensei, they're all dead. With that, Shizuko broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Nathan remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing. Fragments of memories, Ryosuke's easy grin, their teacher's patient counsel, flashed before him. It felt like the world had tilted off its axis. Nathan had never spent much time training with Ryosuke. He usually passed on the invitations and preferred to practice alone. But Ryosuke's upbeat, encouraging spirit had nonetheless left its mark on him. Now, the news of Ryosuke's death felt impossibly unreal. And then there was teacher Furukawa. Though Furukawa hadn't instructed Nathan extensively in ninjutsu technique, he'd given him invaluable combat experience and never refused a request for advice or assistance. In Nathan's world, Ryosuke and Furukawa were 2 of the very few people he cared about. He drew in a slow, deep breath, held it for a moment, and exhaled, forcing himself to calm down. With his pulse still racing, he turned to Mizutani Shizuko and asked in a low voice, "How did the teacher die?" Chapter 55, Return. Nathan waited, heart pounding, as Shizuko Mizutani fought to regain her composure. When she finally spoke, her voice was little more than a raw whisper, and then, as her resolve crumbled, she broke into sobs. Through her ragged words, Nathan learned the grim truth. Furukawa had stayed behind alone to cover the team's retreat. He'd held off 2 Iwagakure Jonin with nothing but his own resolve and paid for it with his life. Ryosuke, too, had died protecting Shizuko. As the squad pulled back, they stumbled into a patrol of Iwagakure Chunin. Ryosuke threw himself into the fight to shield her, but with 4 enemies bearing down on him, his desperate defense could not last. He fell where he fought, buying Shizuko just enough time to escape. It was chance, or perhaps fate, that brought a passing Konoha Jonin to her side. He found her unconscious, bleeding and broken, and dragged her back to safety. Nathan glanced at Shizuko now. Her arms and legs crisscrossed with bruises and cuts. Even the dim light of the medical ward could not hide how severe her injuries were. From the shattered armor and torn clothing, he could imagine the battle's terrifying intensity. If only I hadn't volunteered for that infiltration mission. Nathan's thoughts churned with regret and guilt. Would Furukawa still be alive? Would Ryosuke have returned with them, unscathed? He closed his eyes, the weight of their sacrifice pressing on his chest. In his bid to serve the village, had he doomed his friends to a fate he might have prevented? Nathan paused to weigh his options and reached a clear conclusion. Judging by the likely outcome, it would be far wiser to abandon any attempt to rescue Furukawa. With only his current strength against 2 genuine Jonin, the odds were insurmountable. In contrast, he was more than capable of saving Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko. Even if all 4 Iwagakure Chunin teamed up, they wouldn't stand a chance against him. Still, he couldn't babysit them forever. Already, he'd bent over backward on routine missions to keep them safe, risking himself to fend off rock ninja ambushes and nighttime attacks. Nathan felt he'd done more than enough. If disaster struck now, it would be nothing more than bad luck. He refused to shoulder blame for Ryosuke's or Furukawa's deaths, though he couldn't help feeling a pang of regret. I need to get stronger, fast, he vowed silently. In the end, Ryosuke had died because Nathan himself wasn't powerful enough. Had he been stronger, they all would have walked away unharmed. From that moment on, he accepted that true strength was the one thing he could and must rely on. Nathan didn't waste a moment. He gently helped Shizuko Mizutani to her feet and guided her toward the waiting medical ninjas. After ensuring she'd received the initial treatment she needed, he slipped away and resumed his solitary training beneath the pale moonlight. By the time he finally paused to rest, dawn was breaking. The rumble of wooden wheels announced the arrival of the relief squad at the town's makeshift base. Nathan and his weary comrades formed ranks while the fresh team of shinobi filed in. Once the handover was complete, Nathan led the survivors out toward the main camp. They had set out 120 strong. Now, fewer than 50 remained. Losing nearly 60% of their squad in a single rotation was a grim toll. Even more telling was the composition of the survivors. Almost all were seasoned Chunin and Jonin. Only a handful of Genin had made it back. Proof, if any were needed, that low-ranking ninjas still served as cannon fodder on the front lines. Nathan remembered the unit's usual casualty rates, which, though never negligible, had never reached such devastating levels in a single tour. His heart tightened at the thought of fallen friends and fellow shinobi. He glanced at Shizuko trudging beside him, bandages fresh on her arm. She returned his look with tired resolve, as if to remind him that despite the cost, their mission must continue. Together they pressed onward, the road long and uncertain. Nathan spent the next few hours patching up their survivor as best he could. Physically, she was on the mend, but the grief in her eyes over the loss of her teacher and friends weighed heavily on her spirit. Nathan had no words to lift that shadow. Only time might dull such pain. By mid-afternoon, the escort party resumed its march. Without the bulky supplies they'd once guarded, the column could have forced a faster pace, but far too many were still wounded to risk a hurry. They crept back toward base, each step measured and careful. As twilight fell, the camp's perimeter emerged on the horizon. Once inside, Nathan's only concern was his training. Military clerks would handle the mission report. He was a shinobi, not a scribe. Taking advantage of the unexpected lull, he immediately set to work refining his chakra. The rare respite allowed him to immerse himself in the chakra refining technique, pushing beyond his usual limit. 2 nights later, deep into the late watch, Nathan sat alone in his tent, eyes closed, breathing steadily. He felt the familiar hum of chakra swirling through his limbs, and then, without warning, his consciousness snapped awake. He opened his eyes, a broad grin breaking across his face. After 2 days of relentless focus, his chakra refining technique had ascended from level 3 to level 4. A small victory, but one that carried him ever closer to the strength he would need in the battles to come. Nathan leaned back against the training hall's cool wooden floor and closed his eyes. "Let's see how well this works," he murmured, then focused inward and began to refine his chakra. At level 3, using the chakra refining technique had felt like drawing his energy through a narrow straw, slow, steady, but limited. Now that he'd upgraded to level 4, it was as if someone had attached a high-pressure pump. He could literally feel the energy channels in his body widening, pulling in chakra at an astonishing rate. An hour later, Nathan opened his eyes and summoned his status panel. 800 points of chakra had flooded back into his reserves, double the 400 points he'd recovered in the same span at level 3. With his chakra recovery rate officially doubled, he'd have far more time to devote to mastering ninjutsu and other advanced techniques. Before learning the Konoha-style sword art, he'd never worried much about time. Ninjutsu was quick to cast. From now on, the only question was how much chakra he could muster to fuel his training. When Nathan mastered the Konoha-style sword art to level 3, he immediately grasped just how vital consistent practice would be. The technique itself didn't consume much chakra per strike, but real mastery demanded endless repetition, and that cost time. For Nathan, whose schedule was already stretched thin, the method's built-in efficiency was a godsend. Even more significant was the boost to his daily chakra reserves. Before his surprising breakthrough raised his physical attribute to 8 points, he could muster only 3,500 chakra a day. Afterward, it climbed to 4,200. Nathan had predicted that advancing his chakra refinement technique to level 4 would push that total even higher, and his hunch proved correct. Based on the hour of training he just completed, he now estimated his daily chakra pool at roughly 5,500, a gain of 1,300 chakra points. That increase made a huge difference. If he poured all 5,500 points into his reflection heart technique, he could earn about 7.6 proficiency points per day. Since every 5 points of proficiency triggers 1 evolutionary leap in his Sharingan, that meant he was on track to awaken its next stage in short order. From now on, Nathan's Sharingan will gain an average of 1.5 proficiency points each day, giving his evolution a serious speed boost. The only drawback is that his base attributes haven't budged. He's already tapped his full potential, so his chakra capacity will continue to climb only gradually. Otherwise, he could calculate exactly how many chakra points he'd earn per hour by running the level 4 chakra refinement technique. By the same doubling pattern as before, that rate would jump from 8 points per hour to 16. That kind of improvement would maximize his stats and let him realize his full potential in the shortest time possible. Chapter 56. The Storm is Coming. The Northwest Base Camp's training ground was alive with the clash of steel. Nathan gripped his short blade as he sparred with Mizutani Shizuko. Every swing she launched, with all the force she could muster, was met by a swift, confident parry. The clang of metal echoed around them, but Nathan felt an almost meditative calm in the rhythm of the fight. At last, Shizuko's relentless assault ground to a halt. She staggered back, breathing hard. Sweat drenched her uniform, and dark strands of hair clung to her forehead. Despite her exhaustion, her eyes still blazed with fierce determination. Nathan watched her, concern knotting his chest. She'd poured every ounce of regret and frustration into the drive for strength, and if that intensity went unchecked, it could become dangerous. He chose not to intervene. In this unforgiving world, a bit of controlled madness was sometimes the only thing standing between someone and oblivion. If Shizuko's sorrow could be channeled into steel and sweat rather than self-pity, perhaps she stood a better chance of surviving the storm that was surely on its way. After a brief respite, Mizutani Shizuko lifted her kunai and called out, "Come at me again." Nathan didn't answer with words. With a single, lightning-quick step, he closed the distance and flowed into the lethal dance of Konoha-style swordsmanship. This time, he pressed the attack, forcing Shizuko onto the defensive. In just a few heartbeats, her parry gave way, her kunai flew from her hand, and Nathan's dagger rested cold against her throat. A drop of sweat traced down Shizuko's temple. Her breath caught as she stared at the blade's edge, knowing full well Nathan would never actually kill her, and yet the threat felt all too real. Finally, he withdrew his dagger and straightened, glancing up at the sky as late afternoon clouds drifted by. Shizuko recovered her stance, breathing hard. Nathan sheathed his weapon and gave her a curt nod. "Time's almost up. Let's call it for today." Shizuko bowed low, her exhaustion tempered by respect. "Thank you for sparring with me, Lord Nathan." Nathan offered a small, dismissive wave and fell silent. Serving as her training partner cost him both time and energy. But every drop was a necessary investment in perfecting his own Konoha-style swordsmanship. Nathan knew that sparring with Mizutani Shizuko couldn't match the intensity of battling Furukawa, though Furukawa was dead now, but it was still far better than practicing alone. Training together was mutually beneficial. He didn't expect Shizuko to thank him. She'd always been quietly determined, and Nathan was happy to let it stay that way. A few minutes later, they strolled back toward the base camp. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing, and the forest beyond was unnervingly silent. As they walked, a group of figures emerged from the tree line, moving directly toward them. Nathan's pace slackened, and he began to watch them intently. Shizuko noticed his sudden halt. "What is it?" she asked. Nathan didn't take his eyes off the approaching silhouettes. "Don't they look familiar?" Shizuko glanced over her shoulder as the strangers passed by. "In a place this big, people bound to look familiar," she replied, turning back to him with a questioning look. "No," Nathan said, shaking his head. "They're the same ones who seized our position in that small town." Shizuko whirled around, but by the time she looked again, the group had disappeared among the trees, vanished as if they had never been there. She stared at the spot where they'd walked, her brow tightening with sudden concern. The dawn air was cool as Mizutani Shizuko approached Nathan, her brow creased with confusion. "Rotation's supposed to be once a month, isn't it? We're only 10 days in. Why have they returned already? Did something happen at the stronghold?" Her question stirred memories of their last missions, and for a moment fear and pain flickered in her eyes. Nathan met her gaze and shook his head. "I checked them myself. No serious injuries, no sign of anything going wrong. I doubt there's been an accident." Shizuko folded her arms. "Then why the sudden recall?" Nathan closed his eyes, as if searching his instincts for an answer. When he opened them again, his expression was grave. "I don't know, but trust me, something big is coming. Keep your guard up." She gave a firm nod. "Understood." They fell silent, each slipping back toward their tents. Inside his canvas shelter, Nathan swallowed a few ration pills to restore his strength. As he settled onto his cot, the medicine began to course through his veins, and he replayed the last few days in his mind, determined to unravel the mystery of their early return. Chapter X, A Gathering Storm. First came the ruthless all-out assault, then the covert return of the rotating shinobi squads. Taken together, these blows told Nathan one thing: a storm was brewing. His warning to Mizutani Shizuko hadn't been idle speculation. He genuinely sensed that something monumental was on the horizon. Yet from his lowly station, he could only glimpse fragments of a larger conspiracy. All he could do was focus on one goal: sharpening his own strength. He closed his eyes, took a steady breath, and spoke the activation command: Interface. In an instant, a translucent curtain of pale blue light shimmered into being before him. His proficiency panel, an array of floating icons, skill trees, and experience bars, materialized, each element humming softly with untapped potential. Nathan reached out, ready to distribute his hard-won points and push his abilities to the next level. Nathan, an 11-year-old member of the Uchiha clan, has made impressive strides in his training. Below is his current profile. Attributes: Constitution, 8, Spirit 9. Chakra reserves, 2,250. Max capacity increased from 6,100 to 6,102. Bloodline, Sharingan single Magatama, 371,000, up from 271,000. Skill progress, Chakra refining technique level 4, 52,000, previously 1,000. Fire escape, fireball technique, level 2, 35,500s. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, level 3, 226 1000,000, previously 12 1000. Fire Style, Dragon Fire Technique, level 2, 17,500. Telekinesis Technique, level 3, 305 1000, previously 225 1000. Shadow Clone Technique, level 0, Healing Technique, level 1, 15,200. Shackle Technique, Genjutsu, 2, 5500. Reflection Technique, level 4, 946/2000, previously 16. Konoha Style Swordsmanship, level 3, 50 1000, previously 430. Ninja Tool Throwing, level 4, 52,000. Chakra Control, ever 3, 191,000. 3-Body Technique, level 3. Over the past few days, Nathan has poured his energy into 3 core areas: the Reflection Technique, Konoha-style swordsmanship, and the Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique. Thanks to the recent upgrade of his chakra refining technique to level 4, he's felt a tangible boost in stamina and control, and the rapid rise in these 3 skills is proof that his efforts are already paying off. Nathan stared at his skill list in astonishment. The proficiency of the Reflection of the Heart technique had just jumped by 230 points, and with it his Sharingan evolution surged by 46 points, from 271 1000 to 317 1000, now nearly 1/3 complete. At this rate, in another 4 months, he would awaken the next stage and achieve the 2 Tomoe Sharingan. That projection even assumed his Reflection of the Heart technique stayed at its current level. In reality, he was due for another upgrade to that skill in just 6 weeks, which would accelerate his Sharingan's growth even further. In other words, he'd reach the milestone well before the 4-month mark. A relieved smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. All his training and sacrifice had not been in vain. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the victory, then opened them again to examine the newest entry in his skill column, the Healing Technique, a medical ninjutsu he had only recently learned. With every advancement he made, Nathan felt his destiny drawing ever closer. Nathan finally understood why medical ninjas were such a rarity in the ninja world. It wasn't just the sheer volume of theoretical knowledge you had to memorize. Mastering medical ninjutsu itself was brutally demanding. Take the Healing Technique he'd just learned. On the surface, it was classified as a fairly basic mednin skill, but its difficulty rating held firm at C. Worse yet, using it properly required razor-sharp chakra control. Misalign your flow by even a fraction, and you'd never get beyond the most elementary applications. Those high standards acted like a sieve, filtering out all but the most talented candidates. Nathan was one of the few exceptions. His chakra control stat had already reached level 3, and with the aid of his proficiency panel, no pain, no gain, he'd progressed from 0 to proficiency in just days. For anyone else, mastering the same technique would likely take weeks, or even months. Now that the Healing Technique was under his belt, Nathan had fulfilled the very first wish he'd held when he volunteered for the front lines. With this achievement, he was one step closer to his ultimate goal, becoming a hexagonal warrior. Chapter 57, Meeting. Over the next few days, Nathan watched the camp closely, and what he saw set off alarm bells in his mind. First, the number of ninjas stationed at the base kept climbing, so many, in fact, that Nathan lost count. They arrived in ragged clothes, dust clinging to their sleeves and boots, as though they'd just trekked back from the front lines. A few days earlier, he'd run into a similar group on the road, and now he was convinced they'd all been pulled back from the strongholds. Second, the camp's security had gone through the roof. Every entrance and exit was choked by checkpoints. Guards frisking newcomers, sniffing out contraband, scanning chakra signatures. Even the training field was off limits. To top it all off, a perception barrier hummed invisibly around the entire perimeter. It was active around the clock. One wrong move, and a trio of patrolling shinobi would zero in on you. Taken together, there was only one logical conclusion. Someone was plotting a major strike, probably against him. Yet Nathan wasn't the type to panic. If they wanted to kill him, they'd have tried already. Better to steel himself and get back to work. He exhaled, shrugged off his dark thoughts, and settled into practice. With the training ground sealed off, he he simply did all his exercises on the edge of camp, channeling every scrap of chakra into mastering the Yingshin jutsu. His hands traced the complex seals in the air, each gesture more precise than the last. Around him, the camp throbbed with activity, reinforcements arriving, sentries marching, the weight of unseen threats pressing in. But Nathan shut it all out. One truth burned in his mind: no matter what the enemy planned, he would be ready. That routine continued to serve him well. Each day, Nathan earned over 30 proficiency points, which translated into 6 points of Sharingan progress. Watching the indicator climb steadily, if slowly, he felt neither restless nor impatient. Instead, a calm confidence settled over him as the days slipped by. Before he knew it, 3 more days had passed. That afternoon, in the heart of the base camp, a dozen Konoha jonin sat in solemn silence along the length of a long wooden table inside the main tent. Moments later, the curtain at the tent's entrance rustled open. A tall, pale-skinned man with snake-like eyes stepped inside and took the seat at the head of the table. Immediately, every jonin rose to their feet and greeted in unison, "Lord Orochimaru." Orochimaru inclined his head in acknowledgement, then waved a slender hand. "Please be seated." As the jonin returned to their chairs, the afternoon briefing was about to begin. Orochimaru leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting in the dim light. Without preamble, he asked, "Are all our operatives in position?" A Konoha jonin rose stiffly. "Lord Orochimaru, 90% of the agents have reported in as of an hour ago. The remaining 10% will be on site by tonight." "Good." Orochimaru's voice was calm, measured. He inclined his head and fixed the jonin with a sharp look. "And our information blockade? Any signs of a leak?" The jonin swallowed, but answered swiftly. "No breaches detected yet, my lord, but what?" The corner of Orochimaru's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Sunagakure and Iwagakure have grown suspicious. Their border patrols have intercepted several small infiltration teams over the past few days." "Acknowledged." The jonin's shoulders tensed. Orochimaru sighed softly and lifted his teacup. "It's inevitable. We withdrew a significant number of ninjas from the front lines. Any observant enemy would notice gaps in our defenses. What matters is that the details of our main operation remain compartmentalized." The jonin bowed his head. "Understood, my lord. No one outside this inner circle will learn anything." Orochimaru set his cup down, expression unreadable. "Very well." He leaned forward, the faint glint of amusement returning to his eyes. "Keep me informed of every minor disturbance." Nathan trusted his subordinate's capabilities implicitly. Such certainty meant the situation was under control. After a moment's thought, he turned and called into the corner of the tent, "Where are you?" All eyes followed his gaze to discover a lone figure draped in a black cloak. Not an ordinary Ambu operative, but an agent of Danzo's secretive Root division, far colder and more ruthless than standard Ambu. Root Shinobi were mission tools through and through, willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to fulfill orders. Orochimaru had recruited these Root ninja from Danzo himself, forging an alliance to carry out a long-sought vendetta. More than a month ago, Iwagakure and Sunagakure had launched a joint raid on Konoha, and now this campaign was payback. The previous all-out assault had only been a diversion. The real operation was about to begin. Yet even with Root at his back, facing 2 major ninja villages at once strained Konoha's forces on the Rain Country battlefield. Their numbers were stretched dangerously thin. After careful deliberation, Orochimaru decided to strike Iwagakure village. Its resentment toward Konoha made it the obvious target. Yet he couldn't ignore the risk of Sunagakure's involvement. Their brief alliance with Iwagakure in the past still loomed over any new conflict. Even if the Sand Village stayed neutral, a full-scale assault on Iwagakure would draw all their shinobi away, leaving their own encampment wide open, and Sunagakure would be all too happy to seize the opportunity. To prevent any interference, Orochimaru needed to sow chaos among the Sand Village leadership and send their forces scrambling. He summoned his Root operatives with a single vital objective: keep Sunagakure off balance. "Everything is set," the black-robed man replied, the moment Orochimaru inquired. "As soon as we move, we'll eliminate several key figures from Sunagakure in the Land of Rain." It was a ruthless but straightforward plan. By removing just 1 or 2 high-ranking leaders, the Sand Village's command structure would collapse into confusion, buying Orochimaru the window he needed to launch his real assault on Iwagakure. Orochimaru leaned back in his chair, the flicker of nearby torches casting long shadows across his pale face. By the time our enemies even realize what's happening and scramble to reorganize their command structure, he said, voice low and assured, the operation will already be complete. No one will be able to mount an effective counterattack. He paused, steepling his fingers. If I'd relied on Ambu for this job, I might still have some doubts, but we're using root operatives. Once they've confirmed the target's whereabouts, I'm estimating at least a 50 to 60% chance of success, and that's a conservative figure. Orochimaru's dark eyes glinted with satisfaction. I'm not expecting us to eliminate every single high-ranking official in the Sand Village. That would be pure fantasy. After all, Sunagakure is one of the 5 great shinobi nations. Its defenses are formidable, but all we need is to neutralize a handful of key figures. Do that, and the rest of our plan falls into place without further delay. He rose from his seat, the silk of his robes rustling softly. Everything is in place, he declared. You know your mission. Depart at once, and do not return until it's done. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock sharp, Orochimaru announced. Understood. More than a dozen senior Konoha shinobi chorused in unison. With a casual wave, Orochimaru dismissed them, and one by one they filed out of the tent until he was alone. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, though his face rarely betrayed any sign of fatigue. To be honest, he hated these logistics. He'd much rather sink into ninjutsu research and probe the mysteries of immortality. Yet as the third Hokage's devoted disciple, he shared his teacher's burdens. If Jiraiya oversaw the battlefield in the Land of Wind, it fell to Orochimaru to handle matters in the Land of Rain. If only there were no war, he murmured, recalling the parents, friends, and students he had lost. A flicker of irritation passed through him, tempting him to abandon everything and return to his studies. But duty would not allow it. He closed his eyes, emptied his mind, and struggled to still his racing thoughts. At last, the only sound in the tent was the soft cadence of his own breathing. Chapter 58. Action begins. That night, a fine drizzle misted the air as a massive formation of Konoha shinobi pressed forward. Nathan tilted his head up, eyes sweeping across the shadowed ranks. Ninjas in dark cloaks filled every available space, hundreds, maybe even 1,000 strong. Aside from the detachments left behind to guard base camp and the forward outposts, Orochimaru had summoned virtually every shinobi he could. This mission clearly ranked among the most important they'd ever undertaken. It wasn't until midday that Nathan had finally received his orders. Strike at the Hidden Rock Village's fortress in the Rain Country. And it wasn't an ordinary outpost. This installation served as the largest material transfer center for the Hidden Rock forces in the region, funneling supplies to 2/3 of their battlefield units. If it fell, the Hidden Rock Village would struggle to mount any significant offensive for at least a month, or even 2. Only now did Nathan fully grasp why Orochimaru had insisted on a full-scale assault. This was no mere raid or diversion. It was the decisive blow that could change the tide of battle. And tonight, under the muted glow of lanterns and the steady patter of rain, their mission to cripple the enemy's logistics hub was finally underway. They intended to lure Iwagakure's forces into overextending themselves. By engineering setbacks on both flanks, Orochimaru forced the village to strip its rear defenses to reinforce the front, precisely the gap he needed. Even if Iwakure's commanders sensed a trap, they had no choice. Without extra troops at the front, Orochimaru would undoubtedly mount a second all-out assault, break the lines, and push deep into the village itself. Reluctantly, they dispatched every available shinobi forward. Once Orochimaru confirmed the ploy had succeeded, he quietly pulled back select units, creating a brief but decisive numerical edge at the point of attack, and seized the moment to strike. Meanwhile, Nathan's own objective within this larger offensive was equally critical: slip into the enemy stronghold and destroy their reserve supplies, crippling any hope of a swift counteroffensive. Nathan frowned as he scanned the horizon. Orochimaru's assault on Iwagakure threatened to choke the village's supply lines, and with Sunagakure poised on the flank, the defenders wouldn't be short of opportunities to exploit any weakness. He had little doubt that Orochimaru had already prepared for every contingency. A perfect chain reaction. Suppressing a sigh, Nathan fell in alongside the main army and picked up his pace. The plan was simple but ruthless. Upon reaching the rendezvous point, they'd split into 3 units, 2 to cut off all enemy reinforcements, and a third to spearhead the assault on the base itself. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Intelligence said the village didn't catch wind of us, he muttered. So why bother sealing off reinforcements? A settlement as well organized as Iwagakure wouldn't fail to notice an army gathering on its borders. If they missed them at first, they'd certainly have command alerted the moment the attack commenced. Ninjas had countless ways to relay messages, and for a target this critical, there would be emergency channels straight to headquarters. He shook off the thought. Doubt wouldn't win battles. Only action would. Nathan drew a steadying breath, tightened his grip on his weapon, and steeled himself for the fight to come. Even if the enemy inevitably sends reinforcements, that doesn't render Orochimaru's preparations pointless. His real aim was simply to buy time, creating just enough of a delay to cripple the Hidden Rock Village's ability to mount an effective response. From there, the outcome comes down to hard power. After all, without the strength to back them up, even the most elaborate schemes fall flat. In the end, Orochimaru's meddling only serves to tip the balance ever so slightly in Konohagakure's favor. 10 hours later, as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the treetops, Nathan and his squad came to a bay halt in a dense forest. Their route had been plotted months ago, and so far nothing had gone awry. Now they would rest for the entire day, conserving their strength. Once night fell, they would slip away under cover of darkness and press on toward their objective, aiming to arrive by early morning. A brief respite there, and by midday they would launch their surprise attack, swift, precise, and utterly unexpected. Nathan checked his watch for the 3rd time. The timeline was already tight. If they delayed any longer, the risk of alerting the rock ninja would skyrocket. To catch their enemy off guard, the strike had to go in as soon as possible. The next morning, Nathan and his team arrived at the rendezvous point without incident. After a brief rest, Commander Mizutani divided the force into 3 assault groups. Nathan and Mizutani Shizuko would accompany a 300-man detachment to the first blocking position. They set off on foot along a river-valley corridor framed by looming mountains. A steady river cut through the center of the valley, its banks lined with open stretches of sandy ground. This narrow pass was the most direct route from the Rock Village headquarters in the Rain Country to the enemy's main logistics base, and exactly where reinforcements would flow if the headquarters decided to send aid. It won't be long before they arrive, Shizuko whispered as they moved into position. Our job is to stall them. Nathan nodded. Somewhere farther ahead, 2 other teams were preparing to strike the Rock Ninja stronghold itself. By delaying the relief column here, they would give those teams the precious minutes they needed. They reached the prearranged ambush site, a sandy expanse near a bend in the river, hemmed in by jagged rock outcrops. From here, the defenders of the logistics base, the largest and best-equipped garrison in the Rain Country, would have no choice but to funnel through the valley corridor. Nathan crouched behind a boulder, offering Shizuko a nod. "Ready on your mark," he said. Their 300 comrades fanned out at his signal, weapons at the ready. High above the valley rim, a lone hawk circled. Below, the serene river betrayed no hint of the clash about to erupt. In a matter of minutes, the thunder of battle would roll through this corridor, and Nathan's team would have to hold the line long enough for the other 2 assaults to succeed. Nathan surveyed the road ahead and shook his head. With the defenders holding home ground and our forces spread thin, even outnumbered, they won't be broken in a hurry. This blocking operation won't be easy, and it could get ugly. He glanced at Mizutani Shizuko at his side. "When we move out later, stick close to me." "Understood." Shizuko nodded without a hint of protest. She didn't pretend she didn't need protection, nor did she call for vengeance over Furukawa and Ryosuke. Nathan found her composure a relief. He'd said he wouldn't be a babysitter, but with a partner this sensible, he didn't mind watching her back. After all, they were the last 2 members of Team 17. If she fell, he'd be alone. Time crept forward. Just before noon, Nathan checked his watch and muttered, "They should be engaging by now." But from their vantage point, the clash of steel and shouts of war were still muffled. The main battle lay far beyond their hearing, too distant to pierce the still air around them. Nathan crouched among the shadows of the trees flanking the river gorge, listening to the distant rush of water. Over his radio, the squad leader's voice came through, calm but firm. "Stay sharp, keep your eyes on the perimeter, and be ready to engage at a moment's notice." He gripped his kunai and inhaled steadily, each breath sharpening his focus as he scanned the winding riverbank for the enemy's approach. Minutes stretched into 10, then an hour. 2 hours passed, and still there was no sign of Agakure's reinforcements. A faint ripple of tension ran through the Konoha shinobi, but no one spoke. Strict discipline held their restlessness at bay. After 2.5 hours in ambush, Nathan wondered if the opposing force had been delayed, if Orochimaru's schemes had shifted their plans, or if they'd simply chosen a different path. Still, someone must be observing this route. Complete radio silence seemed impossible. Then, without warning, movement flickered at the far edge of the clearing. A lone figure came sprinting toward them and disappeared into the thick underbrush. In an instant, the squad snapped to attention, kunai raised, as the forest around them erupted with the promise of battle. Revised sentence. Moments later, the commander's urgent message crackled over the radio. The enemy would be upon us in 3 kilometers. Instantly, every soldier braced for what was coming. If you can, please share the rest of the chapter so I can weave all the scenes, dialogue, and character moments into a cohesive, polished narrative with Nathan as our protagonist. Chapter 59, Melee. A few minutes later, a contingent of Rock Village shinobi came into view at the edge of the clearing. As they drew closer, Nathan counted and realized there were barely 200 of them. He exhaled in relief. Orochimaru's plan had worked. If the stone village could only muster this handful of fighters, the tide of battle would not turn against them. With 300 of Konoha's finest opposing 200 from the rocks, they had the upper hand. Nathan and his squad tightened their grips on kunai, eyes fixed on the enemy ranks, waiting for their Jonin leader's signal to launch the opening assault. Then, without warning, the lead rock Jonin brought his unit to a halt. Before the stone shinobi could react, the Konoha commander's voice rang out, "Fire!" At his command, a storm of kunai burst forth from the surrounding woods, streaking across the clearing like deadly rain. The rock ninjas scrambled for cover, but the onslaught was already upon them. "Heads up!" the stone Jonin shouted, desperately waving his arms, but it was too late, the air filled with glinting blades. The clash had begun. The enemy's assault struck too suddenly. Before most rock ninjas could even raise their defenses, razor-sharp kunai and senbon rained down on them like deadly porcupine quills. A dozen low-ranking shinobi, genin, were impaled instantly, their life extinguished in an instant. In that first strike, nearly 10% of the rock forces fell. When the second wave came, the rock ninjas were ready. They drew swords, shields, and body armor needles to meet the onslaught. Their preparation saved many lives. Only a handful of unlucky fighters died this time. Still, they suffered. Far from home, their supply of shuriken, bombs, and other ninja tools was limited. By the end of the second round, morale wavered. That's when Nathan, leader of the Konoha contingent, gave the signal to counterattack. With a rallying cry, a squad of Konoha's Jonin burst out of the jungle. As they charged across the clearing, several of their number lofted massive scrolls overhead and unleashed the third wave of strikes. From above, roaring torrents of fire and jagged shards of earth plummeted down. The rock ninja Jonin reacted swiftly, erecting wind barriers and earth domes to blunt the blows. But their defense was incomplete. In that decisive third volley, nearly 10 more rock ninjas perished outright. Another 20 to 30 lay grievously wounded. When the fighting finally paused, fewer than 200 rock shinobi remained standing. Dozens limped or crawled with broken bones and singed flesh. The battlefield fell silent, for a moment at least, while both sides gathered their strength for whatever would come next. Driven by desperation to rescue their comrades, the Iwagakure rock ninjas threw themselves into battle without sending scouts, never suspecting they were marching into an ambush. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Hidden traps and surprise attacks had already claimed dozens of soldiers. After all, why risk one of the few elite shinobi when you can send dozens of mid- and lower-ranked troops? It's a grim calculation, but in war, strategy often trumps sentiment. Kill! 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 Thunderous explosions shook the field as the enemy's war cries rang out. Nathan pushed forward steadily, though the chaos around him slowed every step. Their two jonin were already locked in a deadly duel, leaving the more junior ninjas to forge ahead into the most dangerous zones. No one expected mercy from an opposing jonin. Battlefield courtesies vanish in the face of an ambush. Nathan stayed in the heart of his formation, eyes scanning for a familiar face. Only when he spotted a chunin of Iwagakure did he veer off, ready to join forces and turn the tide of the skirmish. Nathan didn't bother hunting down any genin. It was simple. The nearby genin had already been swept up by the Konoha shinobi holding the front lines. On a battlefield, every ninja follows their own survival rules. Charging straight ahead might invite unpredictable dangers, but once past the fiercest clash, the rest of the fight tends to go more smoothly. Lowering his gaze, Nathan turned his attention to the Iwagakure chunin facing him. To his surprise and delight, the man also bore a longsword. Swordsmanship was almost unheard of in the village hidden in the rocks. Its harsh terrain and values favored raw physical prowess and a mastery of ninjutsu over flashy blade work. Nathan had finally found a kindred spirit in swordplay, and he couldn't pass up the chance to test himself. The chunin, spotting Nathan's genin rank, charged forward with a confident grin. He obviously expected an easy victory. He was in for a rude awakening. In a rapid series of clangs, Nathan's blade flashed out, dozens of sweeping strikes in as many breaths, each aimed precisely at his opponent's vital points. The chunin barely had time to raise his guard before Nathan's final slash sent him stumbling back, disarmed and defeated. Nathan stood firm, knowing he'd proven his skill against one of Iwagakure's rare swordmasters. Nathan faced down the Iwagakure chunin with steady composure. At first, his opponent treated him as nothing more than a precocious child. How could someone so young possibly wield swordsmanship of real depth? Confident that this little brat would be no match for him, the chunin attacked casually, almost flirting with danger as he probed Nathan's defenses. But with each clash of steel, Nathan's skill became more apparent. The chunin's confident smirk slowly faded. Sweat beaded on his brow as he realized, to his mounting horror, that Nathan truly was in a different league. Several times already, the chunin had narrowly escaped defeat, and each close call only came more frequently. His anxiety spiked. Something about Nathan's technique felt almost uncanny. Nathan, by contrast, relaxed. After the initial nervousness, he discovered his assessment was correct. The enemy's blade work, though practiced, was inferior to his own Konoha-style swordsmanship, and the Iwagakure shinobi was far less proficient with it than Nathan himself. With every parry and riposte, Nathan felt his confidence grow. This fight was exactly the kind of real-time training he needed to sharpen his style, and he marveled at the irony that the chunin, who came seeking an easy victory, was in fact granting him the perfect opportunity to hone his skills further. Nathan seized the opportunity to sharpen his skills. Clang, clang. On the battlefield, two duels played out in perfect sync. Nathan squared off against one of Iwagakure's chunin, all the while keeping an eye on Mizutani Shizuko's fight nearby. Shizuko's opponent was also a chunin, but his technique left much to be desired. Though he had a slight edge in raw power, he couldn't land a decisive strike against her, and Nathan allowed himself a relieved smile before refocusing on his own adversary, an equally middling chunin whose sloppy guard gave Nathan every advantage. Minutes slipped by, and soon 10 had passed. The clash across the field grew fiercer with each breath. Konoha's shinobi were determined to stall the Iwa reinforcements for as long as possible, buying time for their besieged stronghold. The Iwagakure soldiers, by contrast, had strict orders to break through quickly and rush to the aid of their base. They couldn't afford to linger. At the Jonin front, earth-shaking ninjutsu erupted without warning, driving all nearby chunin and genin to scramble for cover. Nathan and Shizuko were no exception. Spotting the gathering swirl of chakra that heralded another devastating attack, Nathan grabbed Shizuko by the shoulder. "Fall back now," he urged. Together, They retreated from the Jonin battlefield into relative safety, hearts pounding, but spirits unbroken. The skirmish was far from over, but Nathan and Shizuko had lived to fight another round. Taking advantage of the moment, the Iwagakure Chunin, who'd been locked in combat with Nathan, pulled back, and another ninja stepped forward. This newcomer, also a Chunin, moved with the confidence of someone who'd already proven himself. He'd just taken down two Konoha genin fighting side by side and now had Nathan in his sights. "Heh, kid," the man taunted in a low, mocking voice. "You couldn't have picked worse luck than meeting me." Nishimura Uchiha surged forward, a predatory grin on his face. As he closed the distance, he fixed Nathan with a steely glare, searching for that telltale flash of fear. In his year on the front lines, he'd learned that a rookie from the academy could rarely tap more than 70% of his power if he felt intimidated. Some would even break entirely under the pressure. "Show them your fear, rookie," he thought, eager to exploit every ounce of panic. But the moment his eyes met Nathan's, Nishimura's confidence wavered. There was no tremor, no hesitation, only calm, unwavering resolve. Nathan stood perfectly still, breathing evenly, as if he'd been waiting for this challenge all along. "What's going on?" Nishimura's heart pounded. He'd already committed to the attack. There was no turning back now. He let out a fierce cry, swung the kunai in a deadly arc, and drove it straight into Nathan. Chapter 60. Killing Ding. Steel rang against steel as Nathan's sword whipped through the air, each stroke deflecting Nishimura Shipping's attacks with unerring precision. Without pausing to let his opponent recover, Nathan shifted his weight, driving his blade forward toward a vital point. He'd seamlessly turned defense into offense, forcing Nishimura onto the back foot. Sensing the chill of Nathan's steel at his throat, Nishimura didn't dare hesitate. He spun his kunai upward in a tight block. Metal screeched on metal as dagger met kunai and sparks scattered across the ground. In that instant, their bodies closed the gap. A frigid gleam lit Nishimura's eyes. With a swift dip of his shoulders, Nishimura angled his kunai in a deadly thrust for Nathan's neck. His lower center of gravity gave him just enough leverage to aim upward in a lightning-fast strike. Nathan remained perfectly calm. He pressed down on the balls of his feet, pivoted, and stepped back twice in one smooth motion. The kunai cut through empty air, the danger narrowly evaded. Nathan steadied his grip, his blade still trained on his opponent, ready for the next move. Nathan didn't wait for his opponent to finish his move. He drove his heel into the ground, surged forward like a bolt of lightning, and was upon Nishimura in an instant. With fluid precision, he slashed his short sword at Nishimura's waist. Being smaller than his adversary gave Nathan a crucial edge in agility. He'd already sidestepped Nishimura's opening strike and was ready to counter. Nishimura's defense came a fraction too late. He barely managed to angle his kunai just in time to deflect Nathan's blade. But Nathan was already retracting his sword for a second attack, a rapid diagonal slash aimed at Nishimura's carotid artery. Clang! The ring of metal on metal echoed across the courtyard as the kunai met Nathan's steel. Without missing a beat, Nathan pressed his advantage. He lunged again, this time driving his dagger straight toward Nishimura's heart. Such was Nathan's style in combat, fast, precise, and utterly relentless. Nathan's strikes were precise, each aimed at a vital point. But Nishimura Ishihara was no novice. He sensed the danger instantly. With a swift twist of his wrist, he brought his kunai up to deflect Nathan's dagger. The move saved him from a crippling blow, but it cost him the initiative. Seizing the advantage, Nathan unleashed the full power of Konoha-style swordsmanship. His blows came in relentless succession, thrust, slash, riposte, each one testing Ishihira's defenses. The veteran shinobi found himself forced onto the defensive, parrying blow after blow while struggling to regain composure. Minutes stretched on, and Ishihira's resistance began to falter. Sweat soaked through his cloak as fatigue set in, his breathing growing ragged. Normally he'd relish the challenge, confident in his ability to survive this duel, even if victory slipped from his grasp. But something about Nathan's performance unnerved him. The young swordsman, though fierce, showed no sign of pressing for a kill. If anything, his attacks were calibrated as though he were drilling, measuring distance, timing, technique, rather than fighting for his life. That realization struck Ishihara like a chill wind. Nathan was holding back, yet still keeping him pinned under a barrage of strikes. At any moment, Nathan could switch from practice to deadly force. A cold dread settled in Ishihira's chest. His fate rested entirely in the hands of this boy. No, this man, who refused to yield. Desperation prickled his mind. How could he turn the tide? How to wrest control back when his opponent remained so calm and so supremely confident? Ishihira steadied his breathing, tightening his grip on the kunai. His stance wavered, but he would not break. Somewhere in the folds of this fierce duel lay his chance. He just had to find it before Nathan decided it was time to make every strike count. Nishimura Shipping's heart thundered in his chest, his hands shaking as panic took hold. Anxiety breeds mistake, and mistakes leave openings. Spotting his hesitation, Nathan's eyes narrowed. In an instant, the young shinobi lunged, his short sword aimed straight for Shipping's heart. A chill jolted through Shipping, yanking him out of his fear-induced daze, but it was already too late. He twisted to the side in a desperate bid to evade the thrust, yet Nathan's speed was unmatched. The blade found the only gap in Shipping's defense, slashing deep into his waist. Blood blossomed across Shipping's tunic as he staggered. Nathan didn't pause to savor his success. With a fluid motion, he swept the sword in a horizontal arc, intent on deepening the wound. His steel whispered through the air and met its mark, only for Nathan to blink in surprise. A swirl of chakra smoke dissipated before him, and where Shipping had stood there now remained a lifeless stone statue. The real shinobi had vanished. Suddenly, Nathan realized the danger was far from over. A deep gouge scored the rock's surface, no doubt made by Nathan's blade only moments before. He murmured, "Earth substitution." At the very last second, Nishimura Ishihira had executed the Earth-style substitution jutsu and slipped out of harm's way. Thinking it over now, Nathan realized that Ishihira must have begun the technique the instant he twisted aside to avoid the sword, otherwise there simply wouldn't have been time to vanish and reappear. So that's why I need the Sharingan, Nathan reflected. If he'd activated it then, Ishihira's movement wouldn't have gone unnoticed. He could have intercepted the substitution before it happened. On the other hand, had he opened the Sharingan, Ishihira might never have lasted long enough to complete the jutsu. His opponent would likely be lying dead under his blade. Shaking off the contradiction, Nathan lifted his gaze. Ishihira knelt a few paces away, one hand pressed against his bleeding side, eyes flicking warily between Nathan's sword and the spot he just occupied. Every muscle in his body was coiled, as if bracing for the next strike. Nathan steadied himself. He'd chosen to act, and there was no turning back. Reaching into the ninja gear pouch at his waist, he produced several shurikens, each glinting sharply in the moonlight. Without pausing to aim, he hurled them in rapid succession. Nishimura Shipping had been watching Nathan closely. He was prepared to dodge. He'd assumed that a youth so young, no matter how skilled in swordplay, couldn't match him in other techniques. But as the sharp blades whistled past, he realized his mistake. Nathan's ninjutsu tool, Throwing Mastery, had already soared to level 4, even surpassing his own level 3 Konoha-style swordsmanship. Unready for such precision, Shipping barely managed to twist aside and avoid the worst of the assault. Seizing the opening, Nathan activated his instant body technique. In a blur, he closed the distance between them and, sword in hand, struck out in a swift, punishing arc. Now it was Nishimura Shipping's turn to respond, up close and against a formidable opponent. Nathan didn't even have a chance to cast ninjutsu. Wounded and under crushing psychological pressure, Nishimura Shipping lasted only minutes before Nathan seized an opening and drove his sword straight into his heart. The shock of pain stopped Shipping in his tracks, and the kunai in his hand slipped free. He stared down at the blade protruding from his chest, then looked up at Nathan with an expressionless face, only a flicker of regret in his eyes. Perhaps he should never have challenged Nathan. Perhaps this outcome was inevitable. For some reason, Shipping found himself recalling Nathan's cold, unflinching gaze when faced with threats. No fear, no hesitation. A true prodigy, he might have thought, if he had the breath left to think. With a soft exhalation, Nishimura Shipping closed his eyes for the last time. Nathan calmly withdrew his sword and let Shipping's body collapse to the ground. He'd seen the opponent's final expression, but he didn't admire any natural talent. Shipping hadn't been unshakable because of inborn ski. Lol, he simply possessed the power to back it up. When you hold someone's life in your hands, there's nothing left to fear. I'd be happy to help polish the chapter. Could you please paste the full machine-translated text here? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rename Qingming to Nathan, male, smooth out the prose, and ensure it reads naturally for an English audience.